very good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Singapore International Cyber Week 2023. This is Scams and Mobile Security. A very big hello to all of our guests from all over the world joining us on YouTube as well. My name is Juliana Yao. I'm very privileged to be your host for today. So this is a collaborative event organized by CSA and Google to enhance the collaboration between ecosystem players in mobile cybersecurity to share information on the latest threats to mobile cybersecurity and also to share best practices for increasing the adoption of available solutions. We are proud today to present a program with distinguished speakers along with panelists, which are experts in their field to share their perspectives on how we can better keep users and their data safe on our mobile platforms. So to begin the conference proceedings, it gives me great pleasure to invite our very first keynote speaker from Google. Let us welcome Mr. Shane Huntley, head of Google Threat Analysis Center, up on stage. Mr. Huntley, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the organizers and everyone for inviting me to this conference. It's amazing to be back in Singapore, one of my favorite countries in the world, and honored to be able to speak to you today. So, I talk briefly, sort of a high level about how we see the threats. So, Google as a company does a lot of work in threats. I run Google's threat analysis group among some other teams. But it's not the only team we have. We have our amazing team from Mandiant, which we acquired last year. We also have our trust and safety. We also have Android security, which my colleague Ray will be speaking from shortly. But we see a lot of the world's threats because we have this visibility. And we don't just see these threats, we're here to counter these threats and make people safe at scale. So, before we get to like the mobile stuff specifically and scams, we have this team that we've been running for many years, Threat Analysis Group, which looks at serious threats to Google and our users. And we started off in 2010 after Google had a major incident from a government-backed threat actor, and we started with that. But over time we realized that it's not just government-backed threat actors. We also had the information threat actors, which information operations, actually pushing messaging. But really for many years, there was many teams working on these cybercrime threats, but people kept coming to me in threat analysis groups saying, so who's the equivalent that tracks these threat actors for Google on cybercrime? And I said, well, there's no one really. And they said, well, how about you do that as well? So suddenly I went from being sort of a counter-espionage guy to now dealing with all these cyber threats from criminals. And what we're seeing today, though, is these threats is definitely not second tier, right? They are equal missions in how we think about this. And the average user or business runs just as much risk from a sophisticated cyber criminal or ransomware or botnet as they do from government-backed threats. But I'll talk for a second that there is also some crossover here in how we actually see what we have from the government-backed threats and how that is sort of going down into the criminal ecosystem and in the other direction as well. So let's talk about crime. Before we get into cybercrime, let's just talk about real crime. So this guy, Willie Sutton, actually one of the more famous bank robbers of all time, also one of the most successful, though he did spend a lot of time in prison. He was born in 1901, and not alive today, but died in 1990. But the FBI, top 10 most fugitive, and over time, he only stole $2 million, which for those of us dealing with cybercrime is not actually that much money when you see the scale of cybercrime today. But he's probably most famous for being asked by an interviewer for a journalist one time. He says, they actually asked him, why does he rob banks? And the answer is, because that's where the money is. And today, if you want to steal money, you don't go to the bank vault. We're all doing all of our financial activities, the world is online, money is online, people are doing their business. So I'm pretty sure if Willie Sutton was alive today, they'd be asking him, why are you hacking into mobile phones? And they'd say, because that's where the money is. So we have to keep that in mind, that just because we see these threats in these places, it doesn't mean that that's because it's necessarily insecure, it's just because the attackers and the thieves will go to where the money is. I also want to talk about why we're seeing so much here in this Asia-Pacific region. I've just this year moved to Sydney myself, so I consider myself part of this Asia-Pacific region. I'm enjoying very much engaging more here. And this is really an incredible home of innovation at present. There is capacity, there's dynamism, there is sort of so much financial activity and also geopolitical activity. And also the largest number of internet users. So therefore, we also see a huge amount of cybercrime and government attacks. And so we are seeing more attacks in this region. We're seeing some of the longest dwell time when they break into organizations. And this region also has one of the biggest cybersecurity gaps in workforce. So there's another thing to keep in mind. There's some success in being targeted because this is where the action is. So I want to talk about a couple of things today in terms of how we are seeing the threats. And Ray will speak a lot more clearly on specifically the protections we're doing at a more concrete level. But so as a keynote, I want to frame a few of the more out there things and some of the larger picture. So scams are not new, right? So wherever we have seen the confidence tricksters from forever, we have seen this targeting of individuals. But we also have the level of platforms. So I want to talk about how we target things at different levels and also what we're doing about it. So as I sort of alluded to, these phones really are becoming our lives, for better or worse. My phone has all my contacts, it has access to my banks, it has my work email, it has all the people I communicate with. It really is this second brain and this place which is the greatest target. I came from, like some of you in this room, I'm not exactly young anymore, so I grew up with Commodore 64s and computers and these systems not connected to the internet and that weren't moving around all the time. And I've seen this growth now, and the computers were relatively rare, but now everyone, no matter what country they're from, down to everyone's carrying one of these mobile phones. So it becomes this incredible target, but at the same time, it's something that we actually have to secure in a way that we haven't had to secure anything else before. Because it really is the key to the kingdom. It's the key to your accounts, it's the key to your bank, it's the key to your deepest secrets, your photos. So these things have to be secured, and they have to be secured by default. The solution here is not that we're going to train every user to be perfect at every time. We do need to help our users along, and we do need to encourage people and make them aware of scams. We can't hand over all responsibility. But really, we have to have a world where users are able to be secure by default, which is one of the great principles that we build all of our systems on at Google. And so, as we think about the scams, which we'll get more into as we get into it, we also have to think about the fundamental underlying platform of what it means to secure a phone or device. So the sort of one big level that we are investing sort of further out at the moment in a number of areas is looking at the exploit landscape. So yes, many people are compromised, which we'll hear about later, by people sideloading apps or people loading on or being tricked into doing things. But the most sophisticated actors, both in the sort of government-backed world, also in the commercial spyware vendors who are selling this capability, but also increasingly in the cybercrime community, they're developing these exploits that are zero-click exploits or one-click exploits. And many times they're called zero-day exploits because there's not a patch available. What it means is that even if your phone is fully patched, even if you've done everything right, you can be vulnerable. So we have we have two programs really. So at Google, we are really trying to make these zero-day exploits hard, because we want attackers to have to use high-level capabilities, not low-level capabilities, to mitigate damage. And so we do this in two big ways. We have Project Zero, which is out there trying to beat the attackers by finding these vulnerabilities earlier and getting them fixed. And then in my team in Threat Analysis Group, we are trying to actively hunt out and find these exploits that are being used in the wild. And we actually tracked, so one of my colleagues on the team, Matty Stone, has for many years maintained this list of every single vulnerability, zero-day vulnerability that's been discovered in the wild and cataloging them. So far this year, there's actually been, against the major platforms we're looking at, about 50 zero days discovered. And 20 of those have just been found by the 3 people on my team working this problem. And what do we do when we find these vulnerabilities? We actually report them to the vendor, whether it's Apple, whether it's Chrome, whether it's Android, whether it's Microsoft. And we actually only give them 7 days to patch it because we actually believe that killing this capability fast is super important. So we put people under pressure. And people have stepped up. Now we are seeing, like there's one a couple of weeks ago where we found they were exploiting something in Chrome, and Chrome were able to get a patch out to our billions of users in less than 2 days, right? So this was unheard of a decade ago, but this is the speed that we need to operate to create secure platforms. We also, and the other thing we've noticed about this is while the number of these exploits is increasing, part of that is because these platforms are getting more secure. It used to be that you needed one exploit and then it would compromise. But now each of our phones and operating systems is this interlocking series of security that you don't need one exploit, you need a series of exploits. So what we're seeing now from a sophisticated attacker is they'll have one exploit which will just get into what's called the renderer process or on the browser, which is the part that views one of those tabs on your phone. But that doesn't get them very far. It only gets them that little piece of data. Then they have to use a whole other 0 day to then escape that and kind of get user-level privileges on the phone or operating system. And then a whole third 0 day at least to actually get full control of the device and being able to do what you want to do. So this means that when we do actually find this chain of exploits, we're not just killing one capability, we're killing many capabilities. And these capabilities are getting more expensive, they're being shorter-lived, and we're actually seeing attackers not being able to use them nearly as much as they'd like. Because I want them to have in the back of their head, whenever they're using these super expensive exploits that may have taken them months or a year to find or $1 million to buy, I want them scared every single time they're coming out of a user is that like, Shane or Maddie is going to find this and we're going to burn it to the ground and we're going to actually kill these attackers. And I think we are making progress here. I think there's more progress to be made. The other side of the security actually has to be actually just fundamentally building these platforms up. That we need to move to memory safety. We have to move away from the sort of old insecure languages. We need to like build protections into the chips, and that sort of is going ahead across the industry through our partners, and that sort of fundamental level of security needs to move forward. So once we get to that point, right, and we're moving along that point, I want to make it so there really is none of these backdoors, mechanisms, or the platform as secure as it is. At that point, we really work towards how do we think about the threats coming to users. And so while the 0 day stuff I mentioned is very exciting, it's not mostly the day-to-day of what we see from teams, from the different attack groups, both criminal and state-sponsored that we track. What we actually see is they will do the minimal amount of effort possible, and then they will try to exploit the human layer to trick users into doing things. And so that means, as all of us as cyber professionals and as we build systems, we need to empower these users to make better decisions. We need to make it really, really hard to make the wrong decisions. And we really make it really easy to make the right decisions. And we need to do what we can to actually empower. And so if you think about it, right, like if you're walking down a street or walking in a building, it shouldn't be that you like accidentally just like trip over and fall down an elevator shaft, right? Or that you suddenly, a spike is going to fall from the ceiling if you step one step to the left or the right. So we have to build it that you need to make a series of mistakes and do something really silly to get past it and put all these barriers to kind of save users from themselves. And Ray can talk about that a little bit more, if we're trying to build those sort of protections behind the scenes, that it shouldn't be easy to get compromised. It'll never be impossible, but it should not be easy. So the last thing I want to talk about is like just thinking about where this evolves to with regards to scams. We are never going to get to zero. This isn't a one solution fits all. There's not some like magic bullet where we are going to have people not tricked out of money. You know, I think the people have been tricked out of resources or, you know, goats or some sort of asset probably before we had human writing. Human beings were tricking each other to steal things from them. So that's not going to change. But the things I've talked about, I think, can change the equilibrium. And I think for all threats and all defenders, there is an equilibrium. So there are attackers and there are defenders. And this goes for normal crime, cybercrime, whatever. But as attackers get better, and if those of us on the cyber defense side get weaker, then things become easier and easier. They have more success, they have more wins, they run without risk. But as we turn this equilibrium the other way, if we can outrun these attackers, then we can actually create a better world and we can make life harder for them. And I spoke about how we do that with exploits, but that goes across the board in the criminal way. And it means we have to hit it from all angles as well. Like, I am this technically nerdy guy that really loves, and I can nerd out with you on exploits and the details of all the sort of technical protections. But in reality, this is a human criminal problem as well. So we actually have to, law enforcement have a huge role to play as well. And we also have to build it into our infrastructure. We have to build it into our banking systems. We have to think about the overall risk management systems of our society. Because in many cases, we're still have a banking system designed in the mainframe era, and authentication systems like passwords that were developed for, shared systems before they were even connected to the internet. And then we're expecting these things to be fit for purpose to secure this complex digital world against threats that have been evolving for decades. So as we evolve this, there needs to be this partnership, and there is this partnership between national cyber agencies, between police forces, between inter-countries, because so much of this crime actually goes between countries, but also those of us in the tech community, those of us building platforms, those of us chasing threats, and also looking forward at different time frames. We have to block the threats of today, but as I said with the how we're building the platform, we also need to prevent the threats of tomorrow, because we can't just put our fingers in the dike and block the holes in the dam. We actually have to be building the next generation of dams to build that secure future. So thank you for letting me have these brief number of minutes to outline this overall picture and framing. I hope it helps a little bit. And now I'll hand over to Ray, who can speak more specifically about how we're seeing this on the Android side and the concrete protections we're providing. Thank you very much.
While we're waiting for the slides, let me just do a quick introduction of our next keynote speaker on stage right now. Also from Google, let us put our hands together to welcome Ms. Ray Wang, Director of Product Management for Android Security and Privacy at Google Singapore. Big round of applause, please.
Thank you. I'm Ray. I work in the Android Security and Privacy team, and now that you've heard Shane talking about the landscape of the threats, I'm going to talk about how we leveraged Android, the operating system, to help protect user and data. So our mission is to protect billions of users. Right? As you know, Android has a wide range of devices, from low-cost entry-level devices to the premium devices, and we want to give the same kind of protection to as many users as possible across the ecosystem of devices. And we do that through three key strategies. First, defense in depth. Android, for all the layers, from hardware to operating system to high-level services, we make sure that we always design with security as top of mind. Second, transparency. As you all know, Android is an open source platform, which helps us to work closely with partners, ecosystems, and the community. We regularly publish data such as our transparency reports, malware stats, security blog posts, and the feedback from the community helps make the product better. And thirdly, we leverage the rest of Google. Google has a lot of expertise in identity management, in machine learning, in counter abuse. For example, something like safe browsing was a technology that initially came out of Chrome, but now it's also benefiting Android users. So now let's go through the layers of Android design and talk about how each layer is designed to protect user and their data. We're going to start from hardware-based security and go on to the isolations provided by the operating system, and then talk about network security and how Android gets updated, and then the higher-level security services from Google, and finally, verifiable security. So starting from hardware-based security. Over the years, the ecosystem has moved from trusted execution environment to run security-sensitive operations to now hardware-based security with discrete tamper-proof hardware. And Android makes use of both of these things to implement a set of critical security primitives from verified boot to key generation in secure hardware to device attestation that tests to the integrity of the device. So moving up now in the operating systems layer, Android is based on Linux, which means it can leverage SE Linux and mandatory access control. This means that even in the unlikely case of a compromise, it will be limited only to a specific domain. Android is a self-contained operating system, so every process has its dedicated memory and CPU cycles, and any intercommunication is only possible through explicit permission granting. It is also a multi-user system, which means if you have both your personal data and your work data on your phone, it can keep the privacy of your personal data, while at the same time give full control of the IT department on the work data so those can be kept secure. And then Shane mentioned memory safety. That's a big deal for mobile devices because memory vulnerabilities account for about 70% of the entire attack surface. Android is one of the first operating systems to move to Rust, which is a memory-safe language. So the saying goes, you cannot have trust without Rust. A lot of the critical Android components have now been rewritten in Rust, which significantly reduces the attack surface on Android. And because of all these protections, now there are fewer 0 days on Android than any other comparable operating systems. Now let's talk about networking. We've all been there, sitting in a cafe, connecting to a hotspot, connecting to the Wi-Fi, and wondering, is it secure? Do I need to deploy a VPN? With Android, you don't have to worry about that because Android uses TLS, and almost the entire applications from Play Store now use TLS by default. What this means is that Google controls the certificates installed on your device. So even if a user is fooled into installing a fraud certificate, the applications installed on the device using TLS will not be fooled by it. We all know that security updates is very important, right? Your phone is only as secure as the latest update it has. Android separates security updates from feature updates so that every month we ship a security bulletin that's focused on just on security and to make sure the patches get quickly delivered to users. We ship those to the OEMs, then they deploy those to their devices. Now, feature updates they come in quarterly, right? They separate from security updates, so we have clear focus. Android has invested in seamless updates, and that's a technology where we keep 2 copies of the operating system. So when patches come, it is the copy that's not in use that's being updated first, and users are only prompted to reboot once the updates have finished installing. The other improvements we made into how to make your Android devices more updatable is through making it more modular. So some of these key components that need frequent updates, such as connectivity, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, are now in mainline modules, which means they don't even have to go through the OEMs. They can get updated directly from the Google Play infrastructure to your devices. And of course, all the Google first-party apps on your phone are also updated directly from Play to your device. Okay, so now above the networking, the operating system layer, let's talk about some of the high-level security services provided from Google to protect your phone. First, the largest malware protection service in the world is Google Play Protect. It helps scan all applications before it gets into the Play Store and to guarantee that it's safe to be installed on your phone. We also use it to help developers through the App Security Improvement Program. So when a developer submits an app, it goes through vulnerability scans from Play Store, and then they will get notified if the vulnerabilities in the apps that needs fixing. Some of the very popular apps that all of us use, like Gmail, Dialer, and Messages, have built-in privacy-preserving anti-phishing and spam protection in them. And then safe browsing, we mentioned previously, is the technology that initially came from Chrome. It is a browser-based anti-phishing technology. And it's now fully used in Android as well, whether you're browsing from Chrome or whether you are looking at embedded websites from within your apps. And then lastly, identity protection. One of the key improvements over the last few years is through passkeys. And Android allows you to use your phone as a key, so you don't have to carry a physical FIDO key around. right? And then you can avoid inputting password. You can just use your phone as the security device, as the key to access your accounts. Okay. Now, we talk about these technologies. How widely are they deployed? How much are they used? Let's look at some numbers. Every single day, Google Play Protect scans 125 billion apps, and Gmail blocks 100 million phishing attempts, and Google also checks 1 billion saved passwords for breaches. How do these technologies work together end-to-end to protect a user? So let's start from if you get a message. That's where a lot of frauds start, right? You get a message. The message from Google Messages automatically scanned for the sender reputation, bad links, contents, and then it's either blocked or flagged for suspected spam. Let's say if you ignore the warning, somehow you get past it, you still click on the link. It gets opened in Chrome browser, and Chrome uses safe browsing, Chrome on Android is safe browsing, and does a real-time scanning of the link to see if it comes from a known spam or fraud site. And if so, it warns you that this is not safe to proceed. Let's say you ignore the warning, you get past that, you accidentally click on it, and it tries to install malware APK. At that point, Chrome will warn you that it is not safe to install a siloed and trusted APK. So how often are these used? We know that Google Messages every month filter out 1.5 billion spam messages. And safe browsing is used by over 5 billion devices. And they're not just used by Google's own browser, but this has become the standard across all the major browsers in the ecosystem. Okay, let's continue the previous story, right? Let's say you clicked on the APKs, you decide you still decide you've ignored all these warnings, you're still going to install it. At that point, Android by default actually does not allow you to install these high-risk apps from unknown sources. To enable that, you have to intentionally go into settings and change it to say, hey, that's really what I want to do, and I'm sure that's what I want to install. And even if you do that, Google Play Protect will get triggered and scan for known malware. So if it's a piece of malware we've seen previously, we're going to block it and tell you it's not safe to use. And let's say even if you get past that and finally it's installed on your phone, we also, because these are unknown apps, we make sure that a set of sensitive device settings are blocked from these apps. And again, users will have to go in and very intentionally declare that's what they want to do before these settings can be accessed. Okay. So another way we try to keep our users safe is by providing and sharing risk data with developers. And that's done through the Play Integrity API. The operating system is able to gather data on, for example, is this app from a trustworthy binary? Is it installed from Play? Is the device untampered with? Is it a real authentic Android device? And we share these data via the API with developers so that developers can detect if it's a risky situation and then perform operations to prevent abuse and attack. Okay. One of the key things that we do is to work with the community, work with our partners. And one initiative, for example, we have here is the App Defense Alliance. Right? Through this initiative is malware-focused. Through this initiative, we'll work with some of the top anti-malware vendors around the world and do information sharing in a bi-directional way so that we improve the safety of the overall ecosystem for Android users. Some more numbers to look at. A couple of key things I want to highlight are the two stats in the middle. One is, we talk about how Play Protect will scan your apps and detect vulnerabilities. Through that, we have actually found and blocked 173,000 bad accounts, right? And then blocked 1.43 million bad apps, and then that relates to also 2 billion plus of fraudulent transactions. And we also help developers to improve their apps. So we've helped 300,000 apps to detect 500,000 vulnerabilities, right? Those translating to 250 billion of installs of apps on people's devices. Okay, and then the other way we work with the community is to incentivize security researchers to actually find vulnerabilities in Android, and we pay them for it. So over the years, Android has paid over $4.8 million through the Vulnerability Reward Program, and Chrome has paid over $4 million. Here is an example of the set of the new security and privacy features we have shipped in Android 14. In every Android release, we make sure that we invest in both platform hardening features to make sure there are fewer vulnerabilities, and also user-facing features to give users more control and more tools to keep themselves safe. Get the slides back up. And get some help flipping the slides. Okay, all right, let's forward to where we were. Okay, so one of the last things I want to highlight here, the last layer we want to talk about is verifiable security. Right, in our mind, transparency is crucial to security. So it's not just enough that Google and OEM say we're secure. We want to make sure it is tested by external authorities as well. So here are a set of examples of the certifications that Android has achieved. Let's take one example, the common criteria, for example. That's one of the most rigorous end-to-end security certification for mobile devices. Over the last few years, we have implemented features in security, auditability, and control to make sure that Android is compliant out of box. We're also proud to say that not only do Pixel devices get certified every year, so do numerous other OEM devices in our ecosystem. To us, verifiable security means it's either open source or it is tested by, validated by external security researchers, or it is standards-based and it meets the certification. So you don't have to take our words for it because it is pressure tested by external assessors and security labs. And last, I just want to say we just released the new Android 14 security white paper. So the call to action here is please use the QR code, go download the white paper, and read more about how to leverage Android to protect your users. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wang, for sharing with us that keynote. And now I would like to introduce the next session, which will be a panel discussion from a government perspectives on scams and mobile security threats. So our moderator for this session will be Mr. Justin Ng, Director for Security and Resilience at the Ministry of Communications and Information. And joining him for this panel, we do have Mr. Gert Alvate, Director of Cybersecurity at the Estonian Information System Authority, alongside with Mr. Andrew Elliott, Director for Cybersecurity at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology UK, and last but not least, Ms. Liao Zhiting, Deputy Director at the Ministry of Home Affairs Singapore. Justin and panelists, please.
Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, cybersecurity enthusiasts, law enforcement agencies, amongst others, and basically enthusiasts about scams. Welcome to this session, and like what Shane mentioned earlier on, I think mobile devices have become an integral part of our daily lives. It is also where the money is. Bridges have been formed into pots of gold, right? Retirement accounts, bank accounts, credit cards, e-commerce, and so on and so forth. So really what we're going to try to do here today, first of all, the first panel about the government perspective, and the second after this will be the industry perspective. And really what we want to hear is to understand what are the threats that we face today and what are the strategies across all the different countries. Public service announcement, there's a Slido code for you to scan later. Feel free to submit your questions as the session is ongoing, and of course, after that, the panelists are also welcome to ask each other questions. But getting started, perhaps a brief opening statement from or remarks from each one. Gert first, please.
So thanks, first of all, Singapore, for hosting this event and for having this discussion. It's splendid to be here, and I especially like the food. Fantastic. I was in awe of what Google representatives just said on what the industry is doing from their part on keeping us all safe. I mean, we as governments here have our say and our opinion of things and how we can protect our citizens and what we can do, but so much of it comes actually from the industry, from the device itself, on how to protect both the hardware and the software. From the Estonian perspective, and we are one of the few countries here who are actually smaller than Singapore. So the Singaporeans love hearing this. Territory-wise, we are bigger, but population, we are 3 times smaller than that of Singapore. So for many years, that kept us safe in cyberspace. It was kind of, I'll try like Shane to go into history here. The Americans used the Navajo in the Second World War to communicate their messages because it was like a secret language. No one spoke it. Well, we Estonians are like the Navajo. There's 1 million of us on the planet who can speak Estonian. This kept us safe for many decades, but not now, not with ChatGPT, not with all the translator apps. Nowadays, all of these attacks that come to us, all of these scams, all of these phishing emails, all of that, it looks real, it looks authentic, it looks like a, I don't know, 5th generation Estonian speaker wrote the thing, even though it's someone from wherever on the planet who has absolutely no idea of the language. So this is the reality. This is where we live in. I'm going to touch upon a few points on what we see in sort of our side of the pond. The main mobile threat or the main scam coming our way is something which stems from the pandemic era. Each and every one of us started much more to use online shopping for everything. And day after day, we get packages from around the world with different items that we ordered or didn't order. And before that happens, we get an SMS, we get a message that there's a package waiting for you, be it from DHL, be it from, in our case, Omniva, Itella, and that you have to go and pick it up somewhere. And I don't literally know how many packages I have ordered or not ordered, or has my wife ordered something, or has my son ordered something. I have absolutely no idea. So every single time that I am almost opening that message, I am under threat. I mean, this can be a scam. This is the attack on me, on my family. So I never click on any of the messages. And this is what we tell the population in Estonia, is that never open any of the messages. Just leave them be. Log in to that website of that company, whoever supposedly sent you something, authenticate yourself there securely and make sure did you or did you not receive something. Because by clicking on the app, you're already under threat, your device is under control, etc., etc. So this is the first thing. We do a lot of awareness raising. And I was so glad when I walked around Monday morning here in this wonderful city of Singapore. I saw in the bus stops these signs, beware of cyber fraud, beware of scams, update, patch your systems. I mean, the Singaporeans are doing a fantastic job. This is exactly what you need to do. You need to educate these everyone, all parts of the society. I mean, my 9-year-old has a phone, and constantly when he sees a QR code promising to win $1 million or something, he's like, Dad, this is how we finally get rich. I'm like, no, put it back in your pocket. I will tell you, act safely. So we all give our kids the opportunity to go online, but how many of you honestly has held like a long lecture on the kid on what to do or what not to do? And for how many of you is this part of the curriculum in your schools? I mean, in Estonia, in the universities, we have several cybersecurity projects, and you can get very high education on this. But in the primary school, in the elementary school, what are we doing? So this is kind of the second thing. From the government perspective, and I promise I will stop with this, I see my clock ticking here. What we've done in Estonia is offered a service, kind of like what the representatives of Google here mentioned, free of charge as an app for iOS, or you can set it up manually in Android to it's the encrypted DNS, domain name server. Basically, an internet phone book of where not to call where not to go. And it has literally millions of these malicious sites on it. We update it with all our international partners regularly. So if a person doesn't want to do anything else, at least download that app in Estonia into their phone or set it up manually in Android, and the phone will not let you go to the known vulnerability. And on top of that, what Google just told you, these things together with some basic cyber hygiene, some basic skepsis inbuilt to you. There is no free dinner ever. That's a myth. So if you come from that perspective, then these are the first steps that I, as a representative of the Estonian government, can tell you here. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe Andrew can share.
Thank you. Yes, we agree that you need to do more to educate users, and we run programs like that as well in the UK. But ultimately, no matter how good those programs are, I think that everybody is ultimately vulnerable and at risk of being attacked. And of course, it's always our number one nightmare when we turn on the news and find that that particular victim was one of our ministers. So really, it happens to all of us. And I think that's why we are focused very much on trying to shift the burden away from the user to try to encourage the industry to design things better. So I was very pleased to hear all the things from Google. We work on embedding secure by design principles across the whole technology stack, from semiconductors through communication systems, software applications, IoT, other bits of hardware, control systems, you name it. There's a lot to cover, and we have to prioritize, of course, so we can't get to everything at the same time. I was very pleased to hear the reference to memory security. That's a big focus for us in the UK government at the moment. Rust is a great step forward. I love the line "trust in Rust," or "Rust is trust." Excellent. I'll be using that. But of course, Rust you can't use for everything. There are situations where it doesn't enable you to get the result you need, and that's why we are focused on working with the chip design companies and the semiconductor industry to put memory compartmentalization into memory chips. Which is a big shift for the whole industry, and we need to try and work together to actually drive demand for that. Heaven forbid that we should need regulation on what chip you should buy. In terms of what we've been doing, quite closely related to what we've been talking about here, apps, we've had been doing some work recently on app security. We've sort of followed our usual playbook about how we approach technology. So the first thing we did was we commissioned some research. And if you want to read about the threats that we identified on apps, those on the website, on our government website, we have our threat report on application stores. I recommend it to you as a good read. Every major app store has been a victim in some way to scams, some more recently than others. And that evidence really pointed towards our direction of travel, which is to try to set some good security principles that we want the app developers and app stores to adopt to raise the bar. And as we've heard earlier, just make it a lot harder to actually be able to attack. And on Friday, just last Friday, we published the version 2, because we got lots of feedback on version 1, but version 2 of our code of practice on app stores is on the government website as well. I do have some hard copies if anybody wants to collar me afterwards. But that is the kind of intervention which we think has an impact in demonstrating what best practice is and getting collaborative working across industry to try and focus on improving standards. And of course, we're working very much internationally on this with colleagues here at the CSA, and globally with all of our partners to try to ensure that we have a collective and consistent international approach to try to drive up standards in secure technology.
Thank you. Amy, Tzu-Ting?
Thanks, Justin. Hi, my name is Tzu-Ting. I work in the Singapore's Ministry of Home Affairs. So I oversee safety and security policies, including for online scams. So I've prepared some visuals to accompany my sharing, and I will talk about how Singapore has worked with many other agents within the government and with the whole of society in order to protect our citizens against scams. So if I could have the slides. So as you can see here, scams in Singapore has been rising significantly. The charts shows it all. We are a very safe and secure country. I think people feel very comfortable walking out on the streets at night. Physical crimes are low, but scams unfortunately have increased. So how does Singapore combat scams? To develop the strategy, first we map out the scammer's kill chain. And kill chain is basically what it sounds like. It's a series of events that leads to the scammers becoming successful eventually. Our strategy seeks to disrupt every part of the scammer's kill chain. And there are 4 pillars under our strategy. This slide gives a flavor of some of the initiatives that we have rolled out under each and every pillar. The first pillar is on prevent and block measures. So we do not want the scammers from approaching the victim in the very first place. The second bucket of measures is on detect and report. Even as the scammer has approached the victim, we want to take mitigating measures very quickly. And the third pillar is enforce and recover. And even if the scammers has tricked the victim, we want to deprive the scammer of the ill-gotten gains. And last but not least, underlying all the strategy is public education. I think this is something that both Estonia and UK reps have also shared. So the strategy is one part of the puzzle. We believe that the success of the strategy depends very critically on one factor, and that is collaboration. Collaboration needs to take place at the whole of government level, as shown in blue on the slide. My ministry is the Ministry of Home Affairs. We work very closely with many other agencies to do so. For example, the police, as well as the regulators of telcos and banks. Collaboration also needs to take place at the whole of society level, and that is shown in green. So in Singapore, we work very closely with private sector partners, community partners, and members of the public. So the key message is this, which is the government cannot do this alone. We really need the whole of society work together in order to tackle scams effectively. And I will highlight just 3 examples in the subsequent slides. So the first example is a collaboration with the telcos. This is to launch a new initiative called the SMS Sender ID Registry, or SSIR in short. To explain briefly, you can think about the sender ID as the name of the person that has sent you the SMS, and that appears at the top of the SMS thread. Under the SSIR, all businesses are now required to register their names, and that means that the scammer cannot use the registered names, and they cannot pretend to be legitimate businesses. So if a scammer wants to send an SMS through a non-registered sender ID, it will then appear as a likely scam. And you can see that in the picture shown on the screen. The outcome has been quite positive. In the first 3 months where we implement the SSIR, we see that the number of SMS scam cases fell by 70%. The second example is a collaboration with banks. And this is to have staff from the major banks in Singapore co-located with our police at the Anti-Scam Command, or ASC. The ASC is basically the nerve center for all of our anti-scam operations. Again, this has been proven to be very effective and improve the recovery of scam losses. Last year, the ASC froze more than 16,000 bank accounts and recovered more than 140 Singapore dollars in losses. And my third example is the collaboration with foreign law enforcement agencies. We recognize that scammers who target Singapore are mostly based overseas, and therefore, the Singapore Police conducts joint enforcement and investigation operations with their foreign law enforcement counterparts. The outcomes has been positive, and we want to do more. Moving forward, we see that there are 2 key priorities which we want to focus on. First is to enhance collaboration with the industry to tackle emerging threats. Recently, an emerging scam variant which has been of concern is called the malware-enabled scams. This is where scammers trick victims into downloading malware onto their devices. This allows scammers to control the device remotely and then perform unauthorized transactions without the person knowing. In the first 6 months of this year, we saw at least 10 million of Singapore dollars lost. and subsequently in the 2 months that followed, the losses were about the same. And this just shows how quickly scammers are scaling up their malware-enabled scams. And in response, we are currently working very closely with the industry to address this emerging threat. These include the tech players, banks, as well as all of the industry players. So for example, some of the banks have introduced malware safeguards in their banking apps. This is shown in the picture on the slide. Should the banking app detect potential malware, users will then be blocked from accessing their mobile banking app. We are quite happy that some of the industry players have stepped up, and we hope that more can do so. Our second priority is to enhance international cooperation. And there are 3 key areas that we see to be of value. First is to establish a common framework across countries to facilitate asset recovery. Second is to develop international norms, with industry players playing a key part. And lastly is to exchange information and conduct joint operations. To conclude, collaboration is key. Singapore believes that this is a key priority, but we cannot do this alone. Therefore, strong public-private partnerships are critical. We believe that we need to work with industry to recalibrate between security, convenience, and cost. And this will require a mindset shift. We need to start thinking about security considerations as a fundamental value, design it from the outset, rather than seeing security as a downstream constraint. And lastly, Singapore is keen to enhance international cooperation because our efforts to enforce and recover losses depends critically on this. Therefore, international cooperation is no longer an option, but it's a necessity. Thank you.
Thank you. So on that, perhaps, thank you for the sharing. And actually on that, perhaps one question to lead in is, what is government's role in all this? There's been talk about how cybersecurity or security is a public good, right? We have the police who patrol the streets. We have the water utilities to make sure that we get clean water. How about the clean internet? How about ensuring our people feel safe, right, when they go about their digital interactions and transactions? So what exactly, first part of the question, what do you see as government's role in the provisioning of the security? And of course, there's another stakeholder, which is my second part of the question. There's another stakeholder here, which is the industry. What is industry's role, and should they be held accountable, if anything, given that they manage a large part of the platforms and the services that we rely on today? Maybe, Gerd, will I start?
Thanks, great question. So government's role, according to our legislation or from our perspective in Estonia, how we tackle this whole issue is that we are the National Cybersecurity Center, and we are the center for all of Estonia. That means that our clientele, or the people we are responsible for, are all government entities, all critical infra providers, all private companies, but also all private individuals residing in Estonia. And I don't only mean citizens, I mean anyone living there, plus the e-residents using our .ee domain for anything, for any of the services. And all of them have the opportunity and option to inform us about any ongoing incident, any scam, any event, and we will look into it. Of course, there is a triage functionality in our CERT Estonia. We have only one CERT for the whole country, plus the military CERT. So our national CERT is dealing with not only the government, not only the private sector, but also with every random private individual. The head of the monitoring or triage team is actually sitting in the audience here, Marita, hi. So literally, we have to deal with this from the grassroots perspective and address this. If we find out now that this particular website or this particular phone number or this is behind the malicious attack, what will we do? Then CERT Estonia will contact the hosting provider, and usually it's outside of Estonia. We will provide all the data linked to it and say that this is a scam, this is a hoax, please take them down, and so that we can blacklist them, both in our own, this encrypted DNS, but also for the industry to blacklist in their systems. So this is from the practical element, but I'll throw the ball forward for the follow-up question.
Thank you. The government role. Well, I think that the government is there to largely bring people together to try and fix the whole problem. As we've already heard, it's a whole of society approach to fix this. So the government role is definitely not to fix it on its own, and we can't do that. But we can bring people together to work out the right way. We can get people to collaborate to agree best practice. And I think then we have to ask ourselves, has that been enough, or do we detect some market failure sometimes? And where there are those failures, maybe we need to lean in and intervene with a harder edge. We've seen this, for example, with where we've looked at IoT security, where we set out some principles of how we feel that the greatest vulnerabilities in IoT should be addressed. We were delighted to see a number of companies, one of which may have been presenting today, to essentially implement those principles. But unfortunately, the market is filled with all sorts of different vendors, many of whom offer their products at very low price, and many of our consumers, many of our citizens will choose purely based on price alone. And the role of government in that situation is to protect. So we will step in, and we have stepped in, and we have regulated and legislated to ensure that that's the case.
Right. Tzu Ting?
Thank you. So my view is that the government definitely has a role to ensure that our citizens are being protected from scams, and for two reasons. I think one is that that of trust and confidence. After a series of scams that targeted some of our local banks, I think we do see citizens feeling then fearful of whether or not to transact with institutions and use government online services. I think we don't want that to happen, and therefore it's important to build trust and confidence. The second thing is that Singapore is big on digitalization. We do believe that online is the way to go, and we want that to happen. And therefore, to do that on a larger scale, we need to make sure that it's safe, it's secure for our citizens to do that. And then answering the last part of the question, which is on industry's role, definitely the industry can play a part. For example, the government has already done a lot to secure SMS calls channels, and increasingly we do see the scammers then pivoting to using online platforms, such as social media, messaging apps, to conduct their operations. And there's a limit to what the government can do. We really need the platforms to see that it's also their responsibility to safeguard their users, and the government will be very happy to work with them.
Thank you. Maybe I would like to take up what Andrew mentioned about market failure and what Tzu Ting said about the individual's confidence and the sense of safety and security when I go online. So, and the question here is, industry clearly has a role to play. While Singapore has tightened up on the SMS and the calls channels, they have pivoted, they've squeezed the sausage, and now it's popped up in WhatsApp, Telegram, and a whole bunch of other platforms. So on the UK's part, I think you have done some initiatives like getting the banks to compensate, right, to have some liability in the event of a consumer loss. Do you see industry also at some point in time coming in to join this?
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, we have there is a sort of imbalance, isn't there, in how these systems are architected. And actually, I feel like the banks have historically had the focus upon them to make sure that they know their customer and that they have done all the checks they need to protect themselves from attack and from the regulators punishing them over sort of KYC regulation, etc. But the poor citizen doesn't have that muscle, isn't able to do all of those checks. The citizen doesn't go checking the identity of every company who presents. They want to just click through. They want to get from A to B in the shortest time possible. And I think that the banks are very much a key player in this. But of course, there are lots of parties in this ecosystem who need to work together. It was very good hearing from Google about things like passwordless access, which is a sort of key way of trying to address this. But you know, it's all well and good that you've got that being implemented by one company. It needs to be implemented across the board, or else we still leave our customers vulnerable. So so yes, I think we do need to lean in harder there. And what we've done with the banks in the UK, I think, is a first step. But we will be continuing to work with our regulators to try to push that harder.
Do you think good? Anyone?
Basically, to add that what we do in Estonia is we use our digital ecosystem for that, and we have pre-tiered or 3 different options for anyone to securely log in. It is and it's regulated centrally by the government, so it is passwordless for us. So a lot of these scams concerning the banks would simply not work because you need to authenticate yourself using either your ID card, which is a chip card with PIN codes, or your mobile ID or smart ID. The last one is actually owned and provided by banks and telcos. So there's 3 different options. So for anything you log in there, you never use a password on that site, but you will go to another tool, I don't know, think like Google Authenticator, something like that, and then you log in there. So this is the identity management centrally from the government perspective can add an extra layer. In everything that we do in cybersecurity in Estonia, it's layers upon layers upon layers. I love that slide that Google was using. I'm going to copy that. But layers upon layers of security, and that's how you are in the end secure, that it is actually you and you know what you're doing when you decide to give away your money for something, that it's your will to do that, not an accident.
All right. Now moving on. Can you flash the questions, or it's? Let me see. The Slido's not. Maybe this malware has been compromised. Okay, well, moving on to other things. Perhaps, I think, okay, right. Now there's a whole lot of questions up there. No, it's not coming up. Okay, it's fine. So maybe we'll cycle back to what Gert, you mentioned earlier. Estonia has been putting emphasis on education of our people. So one of the things that we have realized in Singapore is that as you can educate people and they will know intellectually, but the shift to actually act is actually quite different. So maybe if you quick poll the audience here, who here has antivirus on your phones? Right, actually less than 10% of the people here. So I think most are cybersecurity enthusiasts here. You know about the risk of cyber threats, but you actually don't do anything about it. So how do you get the populace to move from knowing to acting? And are there any challenges, and what your experiences are on this? Maybe Zhiting can start first, yeah.
Okay. So in Singapore, we like to use acronyms, right? So then we have this acronym called ACT, A-C-T. It actually stands for Add, Check, and Tell. We basically want the audience and citizens to remember easily what they should do in order to safeguard themselves. So let me explain what this really means. So add, for example, we want them to add antivirus softwares, do things upstream that can help safeguard themselves. Check is that when they are unsure, please check. If a link is sent, please check and make sure that it's not some malicious app link. Don't give up their banking credentials. And then tell. If they're really not sure, tell a friend, tell someone who can then apply their rational minds to decide whether or not it's a scam. So that's a basic framework. I think that also helps because we want industry players on board to help us spread the message. So they can also use this Add, Check, and Tell framework to then have those messages being communicated. It just gives a more coherent framework and something easier for people to remember. So that's the way we have approached public education efforts.
Yes, we run programs in the UK. We have programs in schools to try to educate children, not just about cybersecurity, but online safety in general. We have ad campaigns. The CyberAware is our sort of brand for how we do these things. When it's coming up to Christmas is when we launch all these things. Everybody unwraps their presents and then does bad things with them. I think that these interventions really only go so far, and we perhaps need to be a bit braver with how we deliver some of them. I was at an event last night where somebody reminded me about a campaign that was done in New Zealand not so long ago. I don't know if anybody remembers that. There were some fantastic videos that they did where, you know, there was a parent who walked into a bedroom and found their child doing something extraordinary, outrageous, and then they had to have a conversation about trying to educate them. But it was hard-hitting. In the UK, we need to be a bit braver, I think, and deliver messages in that kind of way, if only we would be allowed to. But you know, it's when you punch like that people actually begin to take notice, I think.
So I won't talk about the campaigns. We're doing pretty much what you're doing, and also copying sometimes when we see that someone, the Americans or the Brits, or someone, Singapore does something really great, we use the same methodology. I mean, it's the same idea, purpose. But what we do extra is that we have a cyber hygiene skills test, and it has several layers. One of it, which is mandatory for all government employees and critical infra, it takes the person half an hour to browse through the videos and the intro to learn the thing, and then another half an hour to do the test. And it's my goal as head of NCSC to make this not just mandatory, but to compliance like this, that the government official's computer or tablet would not start unless the test is done. And the same thing we actually offer free of charge on our IT security website to anyone living in Estonia in a much more simplified way. And what we use in that cyber hygiene skills test is real-life scenarios, real-life scams and attacks that CERT Estonia has witnessed in Estonia happening to Estonian people. So it's not theoretical. It is a practical example of if this were to happen, what would you do? A, B, C, or D? And there may be one correct answer or multiple, and the person gets an honest feedback. And October is Cyber Awareness Raising Month in Estonia, and I think it's internationally as well. And we are really emphasizing, currently we are targeting SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, from their perspective. I mean, cybersecurity isn't a one-size-fits-all. You need to target these audiences. So last summer we did a series of radio shows for the Russian-speaking minority in Estonia to get them on board with these issues. Now we are targeting the SMEs. Next year we are targeting the elderly people. It's every time you have to a little bit put yourself in their perspective. I mean, if you go and visit your grandmother or your neighbor and help them with this mandatory smoke detector thing that has to be changed out, the battery every year or so, while you are changing that battery, talk about passwords, multi-factor authentication, these kind of things, because these threats are just as real as the smoke detector is. So this is what we do.
Thanks, that's useful. And perhaps it's perhaps it might be easier for the digital natives, the people who have grown up with it, to understand it better than the rest of us on this panel. On that point, you just mentioned multi-factor authentication. I'd like to take it up because we've talked about multi-factor authentication, but with the mobile phone, actually everything comes to the same single device. It's a single point of failure, and it becomes almost like single factor, especially if the entire phone is compromised. So on that front, there's this first, I think, from the, let's say, using banks as or most companies, they have been operating under the assumption that the phone is not compromised. So the transactions are, if you want to transfer funds, it should be correct. Banks are starting to realize this, right? And then they say, okay, we will put in some checks whether the apps are, whether there's a remote access and so on and so forth. Should we take further steps in this direction? So say, for example, for e-commerce platforms where convenience is key, Amazon with its one click through, I'm sure today I'm not sure if there's any Amazon rep here, but what is their perspective with regard to phones being hijacked and with a credit card being stored? Should we tell them that, should we enforce that e-commerce platforms should also rebalance this security and convenience? And perhaps even one step further, should we reintroduce back hardware tokens for proper two-factor authentication? Anyone wants to?
Yes.
Well, yes, it's hard to disagree, isn't it? I mean, we've I don't know what the situation here is in Singapore, but we changed regulation in the UK, and it was across the whole of Europe, I think, to mandate two-factor in banking just a short while back, and that was a pretty painful experience for most of the parts of the industry to implement. and to force it further would no doubt be, receive some pushback. But yeah, we should do that kind of thing. Hardware tokens, I'm not sure about that. I think that's a bit of a legacy.
Do you think, Eddie?
I think that the scammers will continue to evolve tactics. The way in which authentication is being done will have to be constantly reviewed and rethought as the assumptions change. So I think in terms of requirement, even though I agree that some form of requirements to set the baseline standards are required at some point of time, it should definitely be something that's outcome-based so that various industry players can come up with their own ways of meeting the outcome. And at the same time, it gives some flexibility and latitude to then also evolve the ways in which they approach the issue as it continues to develop.
Oh, Rodney, maybe in the next session with industry, you can ask them the same question and see what they say. All right, I have this interesting question here about, well, what are your country's thoughts on disrupting scammers' operations? Similar to how Australia hacks back at scammers targeting their population. Do you have any thoughts on this?
We don't really have this kind of a practice yet. It's a novel idea. I'll definitely look into this and discuss with my folks back home on whether we could do something like this. Rather, what we've been doing instead of this hackback is more and more info sharing with our partners, with our neighbors, and trying to see. I mean, very often we see that these things, to us at least, they come as a wave. If something like this happens in Latvia or in Sweden or in Finland, we are next up the list with the same thing. So sort of not to invent the bicycle every single time, but maybe sometimes in life learn from mistakes of others instead of going through all of them yourself. So this is how I would approach this. But I don't know, do you have a more active role with this?
Well, it's a last resort, isn't it? I mean, really, you should be able to work with corporations, law enforcement, international law enforcement partners, Interpol, who had a conference here in Singapore just this week as well, to try to tackle these problems. As a last resort, if you have actors who are outside the jurisdictions within which you have the ability to operate, and you have people in safe havens away from normal reach, well, yeah, that's certainly part of our option suite. Really, we have the National Cyber Force in the UK. That's our offensive cyber capability. They published their sort of operating guide earlier this year. We believe in proportionate, safe, responsible use of these kind of capabilities, and we definitely need hostile actors to be aware that we are equipped to handle all these sorts of threats.
I must confess I don't have the details of the police operations, but what I know is that they are definitely doing all they can to tackle scams and finding new ways, creative ways sometimes. And what we think is that because scammers actually operate as syndicates, they are extremely well-resourced. The way in which we want to disrupt scammers' operations is to think about bringing up their costs and lowering their profits. And if these ways allow us to do that, and within legal boundaries, of course, then I think it's a way that we ought to pursue.
Thanks. Okay, so we have another question here about data breaches. So perhaps the context to this is you have, in fact, I was from the DEF CON this year, there was this presentation that basically talked about how with AI, with autonomous agents, you can scrape the internet, you can find out a lot more information, coupled with data breaches to do spear phishing, on individuals, users. So the data breaches really have allowed scammers to create more personalized scams, more authentic and more effective. So how can we go upstream to protect the personal data that's stored on mobile devices and apps and in general?
Well, this is a challenge, and there is no sort of a crystal ball answer that this is what you should do. In our case, every single, so Estonia doesn't have one super database. We use a distributed system with secure data exchange layers. Our system is called X-Road. And every single owner of every single database hosting that personal data is responsible for the protection of that data. So there is that sort of a distributed protection mechanism. But how how can we better tackle this? And with these more sophisticated attacks looking more and more real, it is a challenge. And the sort of the common skepsis does not help you all the way. So again, I go back to what I said in the beginning, is that our guidance, which is not convenient at all, is to sort of zero trust in that sense. Trust nothing, and then go yourself to that site, or the official site of whatever service it is, or even call them, use the old-fashioned way, call them up and ask, did you communicate this to me? And only then, after that, sort of open whatever contents there are, if everything seems legit. So,
I think our current big concern around this is how the frontier models that we are seeing in artificial intelligence are going to be leveraged by criminals to make these kind of attacks easier, make them more. You described how the Estonian language is now no longer protecting you from its rarity, but you know, the way that these models can be used is a major concern of ours, and that is why one of the reasons why we are hosting the AI Summit in the UK in about 10 days' time, and that gathering of nations is looking at ways in which we can try and set some good security principles for AI safety more broadly, not just cybersecurity of AI, and how can we put in place guardrails to ensure that we make it harder to use these kind of frontier models for this kind of attack. How do we monitor these models so that we can see when they're being abused to be used for this kind of attack? And hopefully we can achieve a bit more international consensus now, because now is the time to act in this space where we're seeing very rapid development of these kind of technologies, and the models which we are going to see in the next 12, 18 months are probably going to outstrip any of the capabilities we've seen to date.
I agree, fully agree that the scam that's personalized, I think that is going to be quite challenging to tackle. I do think that public education is quite important. We need to make all the users aware of such threats and what they can do to protect themselves. So in Singapore, for example, the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore recently published a list of antivirus apps so that it's made known to everybody what they can do to take that step forward and protect themselves.
Thanks. So actually on that, the thing about apps, so the Cybersecurity Agency has recommended apps, and the Singapore Police Force has also an app, a Scam Shield app for reporting. I'm interested to hear what Andrew and Gert's view is, with regard to government providing an app for the public to report scams and potential malicious activities, or perhaps it's not that working with industry to design a technical solution that can better combat scams.
So in our case, like I said, the app, we actually use this encrypted DNS that already protects the individual itself or the company, the device, that it won't go to the malicious site. But how to inform us, CERT Estonia, or the police, in our case, we don't have a specific app for that. This is still done in the old-fashioned way of sending us an email. What we have done, we've also put a form on our website, and we sat down with the police cybercrime unit and decided to add that there's one extra click and the same report goes to both us and the police, or the same vice versa. If they decide to do this to the cybercrime unit of the police, then send it to us as well. I do say that a lot more of people send things to us because we are not a law enforcement agency, the friendly neighborhood cyberwatch, but the other way as well, because if it goes into forensics, then we will tackle the technical side of it, but the proceedings and actually apprehending the person if need be, that's the police. So it's a combination of the two agencies working in unison to protect the people.
Well, I don't think we have an app, but somebody will now tell me we do. There are plenty of government apps around. But we do have a scheme whereby you can forward scam emails and scam messages to our National Cybersecurity Centre. They then have a relationship with the internet service providers who will add the hostile address to a list which blocks access. So, we have interventions like that. It is actually quite a complicated landscape because we're talking a lot here about apps, but, you've got phone abuse, scams by telephone, scams by SMS, scams by email, scams by apps, scams where people knock on your front door. And actually, the way these scams have sort of developed over the years, we've ended up with multiple different regulatory interventions to stop them, and we've actually ended up with multiple different agencies responsible depending on how the scam is initiated, which does make it a little difficult sometimes for the citizen to work out how they're meant to respond and which agency is responsible for this scam. So we have worked to try to bring together all of those different agencies to work more collaboratively, have a single place on the internet where they can report. So we've made it simpler for law enforcement to operate and respond, and for the public to interact with that. Although I'm not sure that we've done this through an app.
Right. Okay, so on this, perhaps now we can pivot a little bit back to the issue of side loading, which was mentioned early on. Within Singapore, I think the penetration of Android phones is about 70%, and it is a significant problem when it comes to malware scams today. So while we can do as much as we want in terms of public education, there will always be people who fall prey, and I think throughout COVID, we have been socialized the public has been socialized to downloading apps, to using apps to operate. So in that sense, what's the government's view on side loading? Should we have tighter controls on side loading? And in that sense, what do we want, for example, the phone providers to be more restrictive in that sense? It's a loaded question, I know.
Can't think what the official line is on that.
This is a difficult question to address, and us being a member of the European Union, it's not just our regulation domestically, but it's a wider union policy and the freedom of people of what they can and cannot do. So I would rather flip this coin the other way around and say that what we can do is work very closely with the telcos, with the telecom operators, and ask them, not just the industry. I mean, I loved what Google was saying, what they are doing from the industry perspective with the phone itself, but the ISP or the provider of the SIM card, they can also set up an extra layer of security, be it in the form of an extra whatever antivirus type thing, or whatever they offer. And we've been holding these negotiations with the telcos operating in our region. They are mostly Scandinavian corporations, and some of them are already providing this service as an extra service, some of them for a fee, some of them for free of charge. It's also business model question, but rather sort of from the defense side to defend the user of the phone than the regulation side, I would address this, at least in Estonia.
We saw some terrible practice during the COVID period, which was alarming. So I dare say you had the same in Singapore, where you had to have a certain, COVID test done for travel or for work, and then maybe the organization that was conducting the test would send you a kit or something, and then you had to install an app on your phone to record the result in some way, and an app was an integral part of the test process. And we had some of the companies producing these tests would create their app, and they wanted to create it really quickly because they were responding to a public health emergency, and they couldn't get them approved on the App Store quickly enough. Whether that was because it was failing the security checks or what, I don't know, but then they were offering these apps with instructions on how to sideload them, including, steps on how to disable all the security protections on your phone. Heavens forbid, we do not want to advise citizens to do that kind of thing. So, the way sideloading has been done in the past has led to real concerns, and we should not permit that. But should there be monopoly app stores, well, that's another debate.
Right. But you think you're not part of Europe? Any thoughts on that?
I think Singapore, we have already tried telling people just download from official app stores as much as possible. Obviously, there will be legitimate reasons as to why people may need to sideload, but as much as possible, don't sideload. I also think it's not something that the government ought to just decide on its own. Other industry players who are offering services can also do things that can perhaps detect possibility of malware being in the device and therefore install such features. Ultimately, the outcome that we want is to prevent people from having malware in their phones. So we can find other ways of addressing the issue. I think that's possible too.
Right. Okay. One more question on digital identity. I know, Andrew, you're interested in this. And so the context here is, I guess, at the logical layer, when it comes to computer-to-computer communications, we've designed. You have the TCP/IP, right? You have a mathematical process with which you can verify whether this computer is indeed who it is. But I think this breaks down when you go up to the virtual level. Between individual and individual, I don't really know who you are. And in fact, in terms of processes, banks will authenticate who I am, but I don't actually authenticate whether the bank is indeed who they are. So I think that's a problem here, perhaps an issue of digital identity. Do you think that this is an area that is ripe for opportunity in terms of fixing the problems of scams?
I think this is definitely something we need to tackle. I feel embarrassed talking about identity, though, sat next to somebody from Estonia, which we generally see as the champions of doing digital identity well. In the UK, we are building better ways of doing digital identity. We currently are creating a legal framework to allow citizens to be able to transact with secure digital identities. It's something which we don't have identity cards in the UK, so we're approaching things slightly differently from where other countries have come from. But the point is we're helping individuals to identify themselves. We're helping organizations identify those individuals and comply with their regulatory obligations to do so. But we don't do enough to help individuals identify economic entities who are trying to transact with them. Business identity, if you like. And that is an area which I feel like we really could have some significant impact on attacking this problem. We heard earlier from Google how memory vulnerability is exploited in 70% of cyber attacks. And what we need to do is we need to look at those interventions which could take out all of that vulnerability at scale like that. If I can deal with memory vulnerability, excellent. But after that, I would go after this issue of trying to basically kill this kind of scam by making it much more secure, whereby the user can find a way to ensure that the person they're transacting with is definitely who they think it is.
Thanks. So this is a whole other conversation and would take another hour to go in depth, but I'll try to be brief and think off the top of my head how to explain this. So the number one thing that worked for us 20 years ago, or actually 30 years ago, and from which we started on our digital road to build a digital ecosystem and a functioning state where 99.9% of all governmental services are offered online safely to everyone. No Estonian resident ever wants to see a public official. They could avoid ever seeing one. They have lived a happy life, with the exception of the embassies, the ambassador here. But with regards to the services, how did we build them up? We had every single baby being born in Estonia is given a number, an identification number. And it started with 3 for men and 4 for women, and then again 5 for men, 6 for women, etc. The numbers keep going up. Why I'm saying this, the idea is that if you use in your countries several numbers for every single person, it confuses the systems, it confuses the computers, it confuses I can't be under one number in the military records under another number in the police records, under another number in the education records, and under another number in the medical files. It's one and the same number, and that number is public. It's not like the social security number in the States that you need to keep hidden under your mattress, that it's secret. No, that number is public. You can't really do anything with the number. What you do with is what I mentioned earlier, the 3 different levels of electronic identification that you are you using this number. So this is kind of how we've built the system. Will we use this throughout all the years to come? I don't know. We've used it securely for the last 2 decades, and we are continuing to build this. We're trying to move plastic-free completely. So the idea that there's a chip and a card and a pin, that shouldn't be the thing. The device that Google is building, that iOS is building, using all the biometrics and a few other things, should recognize you as you without any interface in between. When will we actually get there? When will we actually start using this? I don't know. I can't tell the future. But I know that we will all get there, and every single country will get there. It's a question of time. So I don't know if I recapped it briefly.
I'm a name, not a number.
Right.
Same here, but I also have the number.
Right, we have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to do a very quick question. One question for Andrew and one for both Zhiting and Gert. So for Andrew, it's about, you've talked about the app stores and the regulations and everything. What are some of the challenges you have faced with regard to the app store providers? Leave it there. I'll leave it a bit open. And for Gert and Zhiting, being small countries, what are some of the challenges you face, given the small market size? Do you actually have the clout, the ability to influence these tech giants to put in place the safeguards for fighting scams?
Well, it's early days on our App Store code of practice. Have we got enough compliance with it, enough take-up amongst the tech companies and the App Store providers and app developers? No, definitely not. Have we got enough other countries joining us in this battle? No, not enough. So those are the main challenges. We've just published, as I said earlier, the second version, which responds to a number of issues which were raised with the first one, largely from industry, wanting clarity, wanting greater alignment with international standards. We've done that. We are now starting a further process of evidence capture and evaluation. We're looking at the compliance levels with the code, and we're looking for where there is compliance, whether there is a reduction in attacks, criminal activity as a result of implementing those principles. And if that continues to provide evidence that we're on the right track, we will definitely stay on that track. So that's where we are.
Thanks, great question. As a small country, we do sometimes get the feeling contacting Google or Microsoft or Facebook, for that matter, and you contact and you get something like, "Thanks for calling, you're caller number 82." There's 81 callers in front of you. So the only way we bypass it as a small country is use the EU, use the Union, and then when we call, "Thanks for calling, you're caller number 2 on the line. Let us finish with the United States and we'll be right with you. Thank you."
I agree. I mean, we have been trying to engage tech companies. Some of them respond, some of them do not. At the end of the day, I do believe that enhancing international cooperation is the way to go. We can only do so much, and scammers are basically exploiting geographical boundaries to operate. And if countries can work together, engage industry together, develop some form of consistent framework, I think that would be very useful.
Great. We've run out of time. So on that, I'd like to thank the panelists. Thank you for sharing very valuable insights and perspectives from both small to big countries to as well as different parts of the world. So really thank you very much, and encourage us to all continue to work together as a community, as ecosystem to fight scams. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justin. And our panelists, I would like to remind and actually have all of you remain on stage. Maybe gather to the front. Let us take a group photograph. If I can just have you all in the middle at the front, our photographer Christopher will be right in the middle there waiting for you. Thank you very much, and you may now return to your seats. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will now be taking a short break for some coffee as well as a networking session. Please do help yourselves to the refreshments that we have prepared for you on both sides of this room. We'll see you back here in 20 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I would now like to introduce our next session. This will be a panel discussion comprising representatives of the ecosystem to address mobile-enabled scams. So our moderator for this session will be Mr. Rodney Tan, Director of the Cybersecurity Engineering Center at the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. And joining him for this panel, we have Mr. Casey Choi, Executive Vice President and General Manager of Global Mobile B2B B2G Team for Mobile Experience Business at Samsung Electronics. We have Mr. Eugene Litterman, Director of Mobile Security Strategy at Google. Mr. Christopher Gogel, Vice President for Program and Product Management at Quokka. Mr. Sven Shire, Principal Security Consultant for Crayon and OWeb's Mobile Application Security Project Lead. And last but not least, Mr. George Wallace, Cybersecurity Technical Officer at DECRA. Mr. Tan and all of our panelists, please.
Good afternoon. I hope you have a good tea break. Welcome back. I'm honored to be the moderator for this distinguished panel on an important topic in today's digital landscape, scams and mobile security. So as the previous panel highlighted, scams has become a growing concern in our digital space across the globe. In Singapore this year, in the first half of 2023, lost more than $300 million to scams, with a sizable amount actually attributed to scams transactions occurring through mobile devices. So this trend raises a question: why are the scammers increasingly targeting mobile devices as their vectors? The answer lies in the evolving landscape of convenience, which just now Bert has mentioned, and coupled with the rising popularity of the mobile applications to perform transactions. So while mobile devices certainly offer many benefits to the society, this convenience and popularity have also made it easier for scammers to target unsuspecting individuals. So today is our shared goal to explore potential solutions, right, to safeguard our citizens' mobile device against the tactics employed by the scammers. We will discuss the possible solutions that mobile device manufacturers, mobile OS and app developers, that we can actually implement at the different tech stack layer of the mobile devices. And through our exploration, we aim to shed light on the latest mobile security trends and discuss the measures being taken or can be implemented to protect our users. I encourage our panelists to share their insights and collectively guide us towards a more resilient mobile ecosystem. And to the audience, I encourage you to post your questions and participate in this conversation. Okay, so for the next 25 minutes, I'll invite each panelist to share with us his work on mobile security. Additionally, I have a specific question for each panelist that I would like him to address as part of his sharing. So each panelist will have about 5 minutes to do so. Okay, first to go, Casey. Before I hand over the time to you, I would appreciate if you could provide some insight on this question. Could you share with us about the hardware-level security features or technologies that a mobile device manufacturer can incorporate into the mobile devices so as to enhance its security? Over to you, Casey.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. And thanks for putting together this panel. I think it's very timely, especially given some of the statistics that Singapore has shared with me. And certainly, I'm not the expert in the Singapore market, but I get to see enough of what is happening on a global basis to know that this is an endemic problem, not limited to Singapore, but certainly to almost every other country as well. Just quickly, in terms of what I do, I'm, by the way, very glad to share the panel with some technical experts that are a lot deeper than I. But I run the B2B enterprise portion of our mobile business out of Suwon, South Korea, and have been doing that for about the last 5 years. And it's effectively R&D, go-to-market, support, product for that part of the group. So we have an opportunity to kind of see kind of from the manufacturing piece all the way to the end user experience of it. So my perspective will come from that, and hopefully we'll get some insights into that. Before I go there, I wanted to address the question I think you just asked a couple of minutes ago, why mobile devices? And I think the answer is quite clear. I mean, this is, in essence, the preferred portal for the majority of users across all demographics out there today, from the very young to the very old to everything in between. And certainly as the device becomes more powerful and it becomes more connected, we believe that it's going to continue to be not only the choice platform to get work done, to be entertained, to do all those things, but obviously it becomes the targeted platform that is most in use. So just to give you a little perspective on this, we manufacture and ship at Samsung on any given day 600,000 devices, and we do that every day of the week. So the ubiquity of what we're doing out there is high. But back to the question in regards to what can be done at the hardware layer. We've been doing this, and again, just speaking from the Samsung perspective, we just celebrated our 10th year of what we call our NOC security and management platform. And for those of you that aren't that familiar with it, this has been a product that was launched at MWC back in 2013. And at that time, it was designed to, from its inception, the design criteria was to provide a hardware root of trust, essentially meaning the ability to put into the silicon a trusted root chain from the moment you turn the device on to the time that it loads the operating system, and then you begin to use it as a user with applications and with network connectivity and so forth. So, and of course we've done that in conjunction with our OEM partner in the journey, which has been Google and Android. So through this particular journey, we have evolved the platform into obviously accommodating and being aware of new threat variations and new threat vectors, but also incorporating and bringing in differentiated features into the environment. Now, what do I mean by that? As much as we love the Android platform because of its open source roots and its nature, we do a lot to fortify that environment for the Samsung experience. And that not only means on the security element, but also in regards to what we do for the user experience. And the user experience, security is a part of that. So things that you would control in regards to privacy, as well as there are specific features in the platform. There are many of them. Let me use one as an example. Our flagship line of devices has the ability of, has a capability called Vault. Vault effectively is a secure area on the device that is used to store all of our biometric data. It's used to store private information. It's secure enough to basically encrypt and store secret level information for organizations like ministries of defense and others, and in fact, that's one of the use cases that we use it for today. Also, from a threat prevention perspective, we use active threat monitoring to prevent some of the things that you would nominally find out there in the world today. So the point I wanted to make in the few seconds I have left here is that the Samsung experience, we do try to go above and beyond, as well as incorporate all the capabilities that are part of that OEM platform. And we'll talk a little bit more about it as we get into the nitty-gritty and the detail.
Thank you, Casey, for sharing the Samsung experience. Now, Eugene, you're next. I know Ray have just now shared quite a fair bit of the Android's security features. But my question for you is, we know that Google has been actively involved in promoting mobile security. Right? What are the initiatives and programs has Google introduced to enhance the security of Android? Perhaps you can add on to what Ray have just now mentioned.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think Ray stole all the good slides, so I have very little to. I'm kidding. No, there's always more. If you were listening to the last panel, I always have something to add. But so I think that's first of all, I think as an operating system, Ray covered really well the multi-layered security approach. We always talk about defense in depth, and so starting with hardware security, isolation, moving up the stack, right? One thing that we've done on Android, I think quite well actually, better than most other major operating systems, is really provide proactive alerts to users and try to educate them on, this is a suspicious message, or this is a suspicious URL, or even guidance on when they try to install from an unverified source. I think the other thing, on the other hand, we also work really well with developers, and I'm glad to see, for example, Sven here from the OWASP side, because I think it's really important, and I praise what the Singapore banks have done a little, in terms of trying to become more resilient. I think there's more we can do together to make sure it's still a good user experience for the users. But for example, on Android, we provide something called the Play Integrity API, and that's something that a developer can use to make sure that they're not running in a compromised environment, right? So there's a lot there that can be done. And the other thing is, I think like the previous panel said this a lot, and I really am a big believer of this, and I'll give a personal example of this. I think user awareness is super important, and I know that, for example, Google has partnered with the Singapore government to provide awareness training for older users. And more should be done in that regard. But I'll give you one example of my own personal life. Many years ago, I've been in the mobile security space from the early BlackBerry days, so it's a long time. At the early adoption of smartphones, I was trying to teach my wife about cybersecurity before it was called cybersecurity, and so she was on the home Wi-Fi network, and I hacked into her Facebook account, like old school trick using just I stole her cookies, and logged into her Facebook account. And Harry's heard this story, so he's smiling because he knows. But so I posted as my wife on her Facebook page. I said, I love my husband, right? And here I was expecting her to praise me and be like, wow, look at this, my husband did this. She wrote, I've been hacked. So that I still take offense to that, but we have been married for 15 years. So, but the moral of that story that I want to say is, my wife is very cautious now about everything, because it was very personal to her. I showed her how simple it really was to do something like that, and she doesn't click on any random texts, kind of as Gert and Andrew were saying. She doesn't click on random texts, doesn't click on random emails. Sadly, she emails me instead or texts me and says, should I click on this link? I mean, I'd like to get it to a better place than that, but she's very cautious of that. And I think that user awareness is great. I will also add on the Android platform side, going back to some of the features, for example, for kids, if you're an adult parent, we have things like Family Link where you can control what your kids are downloading and installing. I think for other users, we have something called advanced protection. It's not for every user, but it's a great feature where you can actually further lock down not just your device, but also your Google identity, because actually your Gmail account is just as valuable because most people use that for everything, and that's also a big risk. So I think there's many things that we've already done, and I will say that we're continuing to improve. You know, you'll actually, not to preview too much, but there'll be an announcement this week about some other enhancements that we're doing specifically in this category as well. So I think we're trying to do more. I think we want to have that strong public-private relationship as well, like we have with the CSA here, to continue identifying other ways to make a difference, but also, again, partnering with a lot of the folks here on this shared responsibility to ultimately protect our common users. It's a shared user base, right? So.
Okay, thank you. I hear you. The key point is awareness and education for the users as well. Okay, Chris, in your experience, what are some of the important factors for users to consider when selecting security solutions to protect their mobile devices, especially when we're talking in the context of mobile scams? You are a security solution provider, so this question is very apt to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first I want to say we're extremely lucky as end users to have people like Eugene, Casey, representing Google and Samsung, putting such a large effort into securing their platforms for all of our users. And before I get to the question, I think it's important to look at both perspectives, both the top-down perspective of, hey, I'm a vendor, I'm the OS manufacturer, and the bottom-up perspective, I'm an end user. And in many cases, there can be some differences there. Like Google, as you saw, builds in a lot of extra protection, a lot of layers of protection for users. Samsung adds their own flavor as well. But at the end of the day, if you're using a Huawei device running Harmony OS, you may not be able to use those same features. So in the landscape of Android, since it is open source, you do have a lot of customizations that are done to the base that Google provides and the base that Samsung provides, whether it's an end-user modification of sideloading an application or a manufacturer adding their own features to the platform. So what we focus on, and I love Eugene's example of defense in depth, is providing an extra layer of defense for those cases. When you're a user that's running something that doesn't have access to the Google Play Store, for example, and you need an application that you can't get, well, your only option is sideloading. How do I know that that sideloaded application that I'm adding to my device is safe? So we focus on providing use cases for end users to check their devices, their applications, in situations where they maybe can't use all of those great security features. And then we also focus at the top level as well, partnering with people like Google and Samsung to scan applications as they're developed, because the more developers, the more manufacturers where security is front of mind, the better for everyone. So partnering on both aspects, I think, is important. And we talk about the question here of how do I evaluate a security tool? It's a very common one. And as you go look around the market, you go look at the Google Play Store for permissions requested for each application that you're considering, it can be pretty troubling. If I want to install my antivirus application, but it needs access to 19 of the 25 permissions that I have on my device, well, by adding the security application, I'm giving up a lot of personal data in order to be secure. So I think there's a balance there that still hasn't been struck correctly with all the solutions on the market. And some examples, we work with a lot of enterprises that are even paying for security tools and pushing them out to users. And we've heard that maybe sometimes only 10% of users turn on the security tool in their enterprise. And why? Because they're afraid of being spied on at work. They don't want their company knowing which websites they go to, where they are. And whether or not that's true, whether or not that actually happens in the background, it's certainly a fear for end users that you don't want to be observed while you're being secure. So I think it's important to assess and balance that privacy impact of that security tool you're looking at. And I did want to give some hard examples of types of things that can be possible with those misconfigurations. So if you are a manufacturer, for example, and you're using AOSP, but you're modifying it, the Android open source project, but you're modifying it to add your own features. One example of something in 2016 that we found, the #1 selling phone on Amazon at the time was a $50 Android device. Why? Because it was $50 and it was easy to get. But in the manufacturing of that device, they used a firmware provider to update the firmware, which included a backdoor into the system for a remote command and control possibility. So had an open WebSocket, you could send requests in to take advantage of that multi-level protection and just skip to that lower level by using that open socket and take control of the device and monitor the user. So these modifications are not only surface level. If they're done in the wrong way, either intentionally or unintentionally, they can compromise the whole stack of protections as well. And it can even apply to end user applications as well. So back in 2018, we were asked by a customer of ours to look into a little known app called Musical LY when it was rebranding to something called TikTok. And Android provides some great flexibility for developers to use multiple features of their platform to communicate between their own applications. So say you have two Microsoft applications. One wants to get the context that you've already requested from the other one. They can have an inter-app communication to talk to each other and share that data. At the time, we found an application called Apex Launcher, which was a phone launcher to replace your default home screen, customization for the end user. And that application interacted with a second application, Apex Notifier, to get your notification data to your home screen. So all a legitimate use case, very valid from an end user perspective. But at the same time, we noticed that the TikTok application at that time in 2018 also included the custom permission to get the notifications as well. So this is a problem from an end user's perspective because in my privacy dashboard, it's showing that only Apex Notifier has that permission. But in the end, it's possible for other applications, if they're not protected properly, to take advantage of those custom permissions. And I will say, there are protections available for developers to protect those types of custom permissions. Ability to signature check them, so only applications with the same signature as mine can access it. In this case, that wasn't done. Again, either misuse, lack of knowledge, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's situations, because of this open ecosystem where, vulnerabilities and issues can be introduced at different parts of the life cycle. So it's important for not only vendors to buy in and do security, but also for end users to have the ability to do checks themselves.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay, Sven, you are the champion for the MASVS. Okay, so I want to ask you, how do you think mobile security standards can help combat scams? And what are the top 3 security measures or practices that you recommend developers prioritize to protect users from scams? Over to you, Sven.
Okay, thanks, Rodney. And hello, everybody. So my name is Sven, and I'm actually living in Austria, but just recently relocated. The last 9 years, I was actually living and working here in Singapore. Was working specifically also with the financial institutions here, also for the mobile banks. And as Rodney was just saying, I'm one of the leads for the OWASP MAS project. Because back in 2016, when I was still doing a lot of mobile application security projects, we could see that there's actually a disconnect back then between business side, between developers, pen testers like myself, also internal application security teams, because back then it was not really clear how good looks like in the context of mobile application security, because we couldn't reference all to a single source of truth, right? So back then, a colleague of mine and myself, we kickstarted or took over the mobile application security project back then from OWASP, and we're working on 2 different deliverables. So one is for the standard, which is called the MASVS, Mobile AppSec Verification Standard, and you can think of this a document that has just different kind of controls that are scattered across different domains, like for example networking, that obviously your app should have a secure communication to your API endpoint. Obviously for storage, it should have a secure way of storing data, all of these things. And then we have a second document, which is the MASTG, which is the testing guide. So for those of you that still remember phone books, it would be a very thick book if you would actually print it, because over the years, we had the pleasure of working with a lot of really smart people, researchers that were sharing their knowledge, because all of these 2 documents are available as open source. so you can also freely use them, fork them, and tweak them to your needs. And for the MASTG, it's really a very detailed cookbook with all the different technical steps that one should execute to verify those controls that we have in the MASVS. So after a while, this became now really the source of truth also for the industry, and is something that was happening now over time. So NIST, for example, is referencing to it. It's part of the App Defense Alliance, for example, from Eugene and also others. So therefore, it's really great progress that we made. And we had a very ambitious goal back then in 2016, and eventually we achieved it also to become the industry standard with this open source project. And to come to your question, Rodney, I mean, it's hard to say what kind of vulnerabilities now specifically there are for mobile scams. At the end of the day, I would see it from that perspective, that with the MASVS and also with the MASTG, it's a great input for developers. So, because at the end of the day, ideally you should do your threat model, right? If you do a threat model, then this will be very specific to your landscape that you have, because there might be on-prem systems, there might be the cloud, there might be other controls that you might have in place anyway. So you definitely can pick the controls out of the MASVS and to just get the right things that really make sense for you and basically create your own top 3, top 5, whatever that might be. And I think the MASVS is a very good source for that. And the MASTG is something that you can use to verify this also by yourself, already from developer side, or of course then from your internal or external pen testing team to verify all of this.
You're right. I think the bottom line is by aligning with established security standards, the app developers can ensure that the applications are designed securely and thus reducing the vulnerabilities and reducing the risk of, the risk of the scams or fraudulent activities. Now, George, from your experience in the test lab, what are some of the common vulnerabilities that app developers should be mindful of when it comes to protecting data during online transactions?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to discuss about a passion that we have regarding to mobile cybersecurity. In terms of vulnerabilities, my colleague Sven, as he knows very well, there are some guidance and standards that can be followed in terms of vulnerability. Probably the most relevant one can be OWASP top 10, especially for mobile applications. On the other hand, sometimes when dealing with mobile application, it's important to point out that it's not only the application. You, on the other hand, need to consider at some point the APIs. This is currently not handled by the mobile application standard or even the testing guide somehow. But basically, sometimes what we have seen in practice when dealing with cybersecurity for different mobile applications is that there are some teams just focused on mobile application testing, and maybe a company can hire another company for performing the security evaluation of cloud services. And at some point, you need to figure it out. Even for IoT products, you need to consider the full ecosystem. Maybe taking a look to an API without the context of a mobile application, you can be missing a lot of important points. On the other hand, based on our experience, what we have seen is that it's common with IoT. This morning, we were talking about the problem of IoT. You need to provide functionality, and sometimes you don't care about security. It's important to consider when you are dealing with cybersecurity in general, the secure development life cycle. Being honest, this is something that is being discussed. There are some ongoing standards in US as well as in Europe, but still you will see in practice that this is a real challenge. And in addition to this, usually when you are dealing especially with IoT products or any other components, maybe you can have a company that is very good developing IoT or maybe firmware, but they maybe just can subcontract mobile application development. So sometimes you will see some challenge in this communication. Going back to the original question, if we take a look to the OWASP top 10 for mobile application, basically this is the reality that we are used to see. So basically, what we have seen in practice is that most applications, they they tend to have some kind of vulnerabilities regarding to IPCs, internal communication between applications. In most cases, okay, there can be some criticality, but it's so common to just send an intent to a broadcast receiver just to talk about technical details. And okay, probably it will not fail, but for sure an error will be created in the logs with relevant information. It's so common. No one cares about input-output in some cases. On the other hand, what we have seen in practice is that insecure storage. Right now, Android security has been improved. In the past, it was easy to access to application storage. Nowadays, with modern Android, you cannot do that. But external storage is a challenge even today. You can imagine. Even there are some ways to address this as well. When you are dealing with shared folders and so on, still some lack of security there. In addition to this, another curious thing is regarding to sensitive data written to logs. And it's so common to take some open source library that by default is writing all the communication in the HTTP stack, including security tokens. Come on, indeed, we realize, I cannot say the name, but we realized that a well-known open source stack by default was writing all these stack, all these calls to cloud services. And we reached them and we told them, come on guys, just disable it by default. If you need it, maybe your developers can enable it. And finally, and related to my previous topic, API is so important. And my recommendation will be to take a look to the OWASP API Top 10. You can find a lot of people, security penetration testers that are used to deal with web penetration testing. API penetration testing is different, and the risks associated to them are completely different. And you can imagine how easy you can do something like, okay, just switch on this device with ID 24. What will happen if I just change 25? No, but I'm using TLS. Come on, TLS is just for encryption. It will not provide any kind of integrity or something similar. So, yeah, so basically, these are the most relevant vulnerabilities that we are identifying.
Thank you very much. Okay, we shall proceed to the next portion, which is the Q&A. I got quite a number of questions here. A couple of them actually spill over from the earlier panel discussion. So maybe I should start the first one. This is the one that has the highest vote. Industry owns and operates the majority of our digital infrastructure, and they profit from it. Given this, should they also be held liable for scams that occur? Anyone? If there's no official liner, I think we can give a skip.
I can say that we are working with some of these people that are being held accountable on the solutions perspective. So whether or not they should be, some of them are taking responsibility and trying to solve the problem. The challenge comes, in the mobile perspective, you've got so many different, attack methods that you can be phished from. SMS is an obvious one, but it could be Telegram channels, Line channels, WhatsApp, email, even the web. They can all be accessed from your mobile device. So the challenge for the infrastructure providers, yes, they can filter out through text messages that are sent through their network, but how can they help protect on the device, from phishing scams that you may receive, through a Telegram channel that you got directed to through SMS. So there's some challenges there on being able to do better, blocking, let's say, of known bad domains and unknown bad domains, and identifying, known bad apps and unknown bad apps on the device, not only on the network.
Okay. Well, I think, for instance, if we take SMS as a reference, and previously we were discussing about this solution from Singapore to have these IDs in order to identify a scam. Come on, guys, we are using a technology 30 years old. There should be a commitment between all the involved parts in just try to avoid using SMS. Right now, there are better solutions. There are open source solutions that can be used instead of using SMS. But all the actors, stakeholders, needs to be involved in order to change this. Because we are using a technology, we recently indeed, we presented a white paper regarding to SMS insecurity in Mobile World Congress recently about this topic. SMS is not able to provide any kind of confidentiality, integrity, or whatever, and even non-repudiation. So basically, we need to move forward. We need to embrace new standards in order to avoid this kind of issues. And industry by themselves cannot do this. There should be some commitment between all the different stakeholders involved.
Anyone want to?
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment on this. I think this boils down to a question of attribution, right? How do we begin to understand who and what proportion and others? I had dinner just the other night at this event with a representative from Interpol, and one of the comments that Mr. Kavanaugh made to me, and hopefully he's still here, is that just from because these scams are occurring across international boundaries or different provenances, different governance methods, and so forth, it's very difficult, even from a legal perspective, to hold entities liable. So again, I do think that there's a shared interest in this, certainly from the industry and from vendors and from developers, and I think that's one of the things that we're talking about here. Liability becomes a really interesting question because I don't think we've evolved to the point yet where we can assess liability or attestation of that. There are plenty of instances when things are very specific to the point where we've had to attest to that. And in those cases where, again, there is that degree of precision, again, I'm a fan of making sure that there's accountability there. But I think in the current climate that we're seeing, especially in the sophistication and the origination of these scams, easy to talk about, very, very difficult to do. It doesn't mean that I don't think that there should be accountability, but again, it's proven to be an exceptionally elusive objective for us.
I would just also add, with regards to industry, obviously, again, it's a public and private relationship, but when you look at, I think the deputy director from MHA mentioned, it's a kill chain, right? It's multiple steps in the process. So it's a shared burden. Is it moving to using RCS? Is it using RCS Business is a great example. We can mitigate so many scams today if the identity of the sender, just like what is happening in Singapore with text messaging, that's in a one country scenario, it's a one-off scenario, which is great, but how does that happen broadly? Why can't there be a broad consensus that, just like in Gmail today, you have the brand identification standard where you can now see, because domains get registered and you're getting an email from a legitimate source versus an illegitimate source. Same with caller ID and scam prevention. Why are there no centralized approaches to registering those things? I mean, we can all definitely do more. I would go with the example of with banking apps. I think Jorge mentioned it earlier. Why is OTP over SMS still the default? Why aren't we using passkeys and biometric prompt? Why do users even have to type in a password? There's so many things we can all do together, and I think working with the public sector to set the right bar, and that could be applied broadly, not just in one market or the other. How do we work collaboratively together to raise the bar for everyone?
Anybody else want to add?
Just one thing to add maybe is I think in general we just have a too complex environment, because how shall a normal user also navigate through everything in the first place? Mm-hmm. I mean, Chris was already saying earlier that Telegram channels, there's so many different ways of communication. How shall one actually know which one is not really the right one, which is really the one that I can trust? And the thing is, we need to also really set guardrails in that sense for the users to really make things easier, because even if a user needs to make a decision, that's already too much, I would say. Because at the end of the day, they want to use a service, right? And I think this is where, with the standard, we want to go into that direction to make it clearer for everyone what they should be focusing on. And Android, for example, is doing a great job over the last few years, for example, that specific vulnerabilities also cannot easily be exploited anymore, like tap checking, for example. There are more and more boundaries in it for attackers. So I think this is also the way where we need to go, basically, because otherwise people or users will just be overwhelmed at the end of the day. And that's just where we need to head to also in the future.
Yep. I just want to pick up the word private-public partnership. I'm wondering your public is referring to the government or the members of public. Anyway, here's your chance right now. I suspect the next question comes from the industry and is a wish list that they have for the government. From an industry standpoint, what would you like the government to do more to help protect people from mobile scams? Here's your chance. Come.
Well, I can jump in first again, but I think what really the government can do is empower people. Eugene's hit on this a few times. How can we educate users? Previous panel as well. How can we educate users to be aware, but also give them the tools to educate themselves? So not only education about what a phishing scam looks like or other tools like that, but enabling them to be safe with the choices they make in the apps they download and the things they use. So I'll give you an example. If I'm looking for another way to protect myself, one of those security apps, I'm looking for an extra layer of protection from spam. There's today a very popular app with tens of millions of downloads on the store that purports to do that. It blocks bad phishing phone numbers, SMSs, things like that. But at the same time, it leaks all of your text messages to the log. So when I'm making a decision as an end user, if I only have the ability to look at the rating, for example, the 5-star rating, well, it's got 4.5 stars, I'm going to use it. But at the end of the day, I'm maybe making myself more insecure by adding that application to my device. So can we provide and empower users with a way to check the security of applications before they install them, whether they're side-loaded from the market? And this is something that Singaporeans are very lucky. Their government is very proactive in efforts like this, and we're working with the CSA in Singapore to provide a service like this.
If I could add on to that, actually, and it was a perfect plug, I swear, Chris, we didn't coordinate this at all, but this is why at Google, we spent a lot of time working with OWASP through the App Defense Alliance, because the Google Play Store is actually the first commercial app store to show apps that have an independent security review. So this is actually a great opportunity to hopefully educate users, and it's something we want to make more prominent as part of currently it's part of the data safety section in the store. But if you look, we just had a blog post talking about how we're doing this primarily starting with VPN apps. But I can see finance apps being another example. Of course, the problem there is finance apps, you use that bank, you have to use their app. So I think that's one example where government could help, of course, is dictating a set of requirements to certain app categories that are very sensitive in nature. The other thing, and this is really what Gert was talking about, I found it amazing what they're doing with secure DNS and basically saying use our DNS service. That's great for that country. But what would be even cooler is how do they do threat intel sharing with us so that we can put that into safe browsing, which is already installed in 5 billion endpoints, right? We could leverage that intelligence. And I think that's one thing that we're working on here with the cybersecurity agency, but we'd like to do this more broadly, is start to do more threat intelligence sharing with the governments, also with the banks, and be able to collaborate and gain from each other's insights and become more resilient together.
Casey, any thoughts?
I think, again, Christopher and Eugene brought up some real salient points around education. Just one other point I would add on education is, again, the genesis of a lot of these malice efforts, scams and otherwise, are originating at the mobile device, but most of them are hybrid attacks. They involve a lot of process that are outside of the mobile domain. It could be a phone call, it could be more analog in nature. So I think really, again, taking the time to fully work through what these things look like and how they're progressed, and then again, the speed of informing the public, I think, is key. The other thing I would say here is, and I think this is maybe antithesis to what a vendor would ask for, is I think I would like governments to set higher standards in terms of what the requirements are, because Christopher brought up that great example of buying a $50 phone off of Amazon. Part of this is there's a reason why it's $50. There has to be, I think, a higher set of standards that are set by governments and consistent standards that are set by governments globally. One of the things that I talked about on another panel is that as a vendor, we spend a lot of time, effort, and money on certifying for different government entities. But when we look at those regulations, they're very similar in nature. So rather than having redundancy, I would love to see, beyond just common criteria, standards, a set of standards that start to be recognized as global standards that can be enforced a little bit more. But I'm all for higher standards in terms of requirements from the vendor as far as it relates to user privacy capability or others, because I think that's one way that we get better at this, because this is not going to slow down. These types of attacks, sophistication, the nature of it is going to get more sophisticated versus less sophisticated. So again, I think keeping a very high requirement is something that is I think good for the industry.
Yeah, I would like to add on as well. We can look at the privacy problem that's been tackled over the last 7 years, starting with EU introducing GDPR. No one was taking security privacy really until they started enforcing regulations and enforcing fees for lack of compliance with those regulations. So, one thing aside from doing standards is tying those standards to some sort of penalty. If we tie back to that example of the Amazon device, there was no real repercussions for that manufacturer or for Amazon for hosting that device that had that issue. Essentially, the repercussion was lack of sale. They had to pull it from the listing, and they didn't get any proceeds from it anymore. But there's not really an incentive to stop them again, to take security seriously and stop that from happening again. Whether it's on the distributor, whether it's on the manufacturer, the component that was in the end vulnerable, that's a complex situation. But I think in order to really level it up and take it to that next level is standards, like KC said, and then tying those standards to some sort of fees and other regulations.
Yeah. One thing really quick to add, because Casey hit on a good point. This is something we talked about in the previous panel on connected device security, right? Smartphones play a critical role. Those apps run on smartphones. You need to ensure that the smartphones can guarantee certain security primitives. Yeah. And this is, the GSM Alliance has been working on a program just for that, right? Which is kind of like what Common Criteria does for enterprise, but for consumers, so that there is transparency, because you said there need to be incentives. Some of them could be regulatory. Others could just simply be the fact that, if you look at the way things work, if one vendor does something, another vendor will try to compete with that. And so having that transparency, if there's objective measurement criteria so consumers can make informed purchase decisions. This doesn't solve the scam problem per se, but it will solve the critical lower security features. How many years of updates you get? How good is the encryption? It definitely will solve the Amazon scenario that Chris mentioned.
So a related question is, we can certify the device, we can certify the mobile apps. What about certifying the app developers? Any thoughts on this?
Well, from certification of applications, there are different initiatives from the App Defense Alliance that it was mentioned during the meeting this morning. There are some initiatives based on OWASP, Mobile Application Security Verification Standard, some testing guide, in order to try to at least address the most common vulnerabilities affecting mobile applications. And being honest, from a lab perspective, what we were expecting, because in the very beginning we were receiving well-known applications and so on, we were expecting, okay, this will be a pass, we are going to have everything okay, and it will go smooth. And later on, maybe we will start finding some issues, but reality was completely different. We identified many issues. We found some things that were not expected. And finally, we realized that even our understanding working on cybersecurity and working and evaluating and performing penetration testing for mobile applications was that the state of the art was not as good as expected, so to say. But for sure that this kind of initiatives has improved clearly the cybersecurity at all levels in terms of mobile applications, because in order to get this security badge, you will need to pass all the testing procedures. And basically, these kind of initiatives can be adopted by regulators as well. What we are seeing in the new regulations, for instance, in Europe, we have the Cyber Resilience Act. We have been discussing about this one in previous meeting, and probably this kind of regulations are well aligned with this kind of initiative. So for sure, this this certification or maybe this security badge or whatever, or these security evaluations in general are improving the overall security of the full ecosystem. That's clear.
I think there's a few challenges to the idea of certifying app developers, and I'd be interested to hear what Sven thinks. But from my perspective, when we work with developers, typically they only develop actually a quarter or less of the code that ends up in the application. Most of it's reused from other sources, whether open source or paid for closed source. So you may be able to vet that developer's intention. They're good intentions. They do they write good code. But at the end of the day, if one of those open source libraries or closed source libraries introduces an issue, the application from that developer could still be risky. So how do you take that idea to do continuous validation of those applications regardless of the developer, I think, is where we'll end up going.
If I could chime in on that, I think there's two aspects. There's the, I would call benign intent, where like a developer uses Stack Overflow and finds an article that's very outdated and introduces risks to their apps and to their users, and there's malicious intent. And I do think validating developers, I know certain governments are doing this for websites where they issue extended validation certificates, and they do this validation of the person requesting the certificate. So I think that's a great model. Again, I think that's you heard me say before, but I think this is a great example of a industry working with government to define what that looks like globally, because it couldn't scale on a country-by-country basis. There needs to be a process to do this uniformly. And like, in the U.S. we have D&B, or Dun & Bradstreet, whatever. But how would you do that in a different country or in a more global aspect? I do think it's an interesting thing to pursue and investigate, though.
Okay, maybe just to add to that question, I mean, regardless of certified or not, I think it's really about getting developers the right tools into their hands. And I think there are, of course, a lot of tools out there, but for example, what we are trying to do as part of the project, because at the moment we're also trying to refactor the complete testing guide that we are having. And our goal is, for example, to break down test cases into very small steps that can, of course, easily be followed by pen testers, but they should also easily be consumable by developers. On top of that, we really would like to just have very simple ways of how they can verify this, because if there's only then the pen test at the end that can verify this, that's of course too late. This should be done in an agile way, how everybody's developing these days. And this is also where we want to push with the project to adjust to the current things of how development is happening and to give this also into the hand of developers. So this is, for example, one of the goals that we're actively working on with various different kind of partners also now and also throughout next year, which is one of our goals also.
Okay, maybe we pivot our discussion a little. I have a question here. Is it technically possible to develop banking apps to run entirely in TEE, trusted execution environment, instead of within the rich OS such that it could not be tampered with by malware?
Yeah, I mean,
anyone?
I could start as an OS provider. This gets asked sometimes, and I think the tricky part is that's a very opaque part of the environment, that the more you put in there, it's meant to run critical security primitives. So the more you put in there, actually, the higher likelihood you increase a risk, you add risk to it. I think one example that we've looked at, and we actually have a bank doing this in Switzerland, right? Ray, keep me honest, is we have an Android feature called Protected Confirmation. So instead of running the banking app in the TEE, we have a trusted UI running in the TEE. So when it shows some sensitive information, it actually shows it in the trusted UI, so nothing can see it, and it requires physical user confirmation to acknowledge something for a transaction. So that's a great example and actually being used in the real world. The other thing I would add is on Android, we're trying to come up with different ways that are more scalable to do that. So nice thing about Android, we can segment the rich OS from other parts using hypervisors. And so we have something called the Android Virtualization Framework, which just came out about, I think with the Pixel 6 was the first device to support it, but many devices are now supporting it. And you can run stuff in a virtual machine isolated from the rich OS. So that's, I think, a use case we have been talking with banks about to pursue.
Yeah, and I think from a deployment perspective, there's also some challenges to that idea. I've worked with Samsung in the past trying to deploy some technologies that runs at the TEE level, and when we get to the end customer, if they have even 50% Samsung devices, well, the technology will only work on those Samsung devices because in most cases, those features are chipset specific. So you not only have to have the feature built into the chipset that's on the device, but you also have to have the manufacturer turn on that feature of the chipset as well. So there are some challenges, I think, to deployment. Of course, securing half or 25% or 10% of people may be worth the effort.
Okay, my next question. Nowadays, you cannot walk away from a tech conference without talking about artificial intelligence, right? So what role do you see AI playing in detecting and preventing mobile scams? Can we give some examples of how these technologies are being applied effectively? Anyone?
I'll take a first crack at it and see where it goes. I guess my opening comment on this is I believe that the AI itself will obviously present a kind of an existential threat in terms of, again, the sophistication and the threat vectors that we're talking about. The perspective that we're starting to take, and again, I'm taking a little bit more of a business approach first, less of an enterprise or a consumer approach, is that I think you have to use AI to fight AI. What you don't want to do is to bring a knife to a gunfight, because you will lose in that scenario. So one of the things that we're looking at very closely is as the device becomes more capable, we have significant GPU, NPU capability on the device today, plenty of memory, plenty of capability. I foresee a scenario where, again, the capabilities of the on-device capacity will be used to, again, provide protection as well as threat defense in these scenarios. If you look at it today, I mean, we're already at the cusp of doing much of this today and have done a lot of this when you look at things like zero trust or attestation, where all of that has to be done in an environment where there's contextual awareness of the user, the application, the device state. And that used to be called continuous multi-factor. I see this as extensions of this, but now what we've really got to do is utilize the full capacity that is available, along with obviously connectivity to cloud and other environments, so that we are really utilizing the power of AI to battle the dark side forces of AI that will ultimately be there. So I'll start the dialogue with that. I think it's one of the things that has to be tapped as part of preventative threat defense going forward.
I would just add, I mean, Casey's spot on. It's both a good and a bad, right? Yep. Threat actors are using it. I think Gert, rather, I'm pointing as he's there, but he's not, said really well. Like, look at Estonia and their language and how they're now able to just generate scams, in the native language using AI. I think on the flip side, a lot of vendors are already using, I mean, machine learning transition to AI, but like our tools already all use machine learning. And I think Casey's spot on that a lot of that is now moving on device because the capabilities of these devices and how they're designed, that you can do a lot more on device abuse detection and look at patterns and start actually analyzing and reacting to novel threats like polymorphic, where they're actually completely changing the way they operate. So it's not the traditional detect and react. You can actually learn from it on device and react in real time.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, if you look at the Apple Developer Conference, Google's recent Pixel Conference, there's a lot of public focus, at least today, on the power of the AI chips on the devices to do things like make you smile when you weren't smiling, in Google's case, and other things there. But I think what you'll see coming up, and I know this because I was working on a project even 6 years ago to do exactly this, leveraging those on-device, high-power processing units that are specialized for this use case to do things like detect those attacks, detect those applications when they're installed, when they start to access certain functionality, detecting that behavior and being able to respond. So hopefully next year on the Google conference, we'll see AI-featured security.
Okay. Okay, I think we only have time for the last question. So probably I'll pick something related to site loading. When EU regulations forcing smartphones to have application site loading capabilities, how can we still make sure end users do not accidentally install malicious app?
Well, I will take this one. From Android perspective, from Android user perspective, there is nothing new. In previous presentation, we already seen all the things that you need to do in order to enable this kind of installs. The major concern that we have is right now with iOS, because iOS users are not used to deal with side loading. And this is something that will be challenging, but probably good news, so to say, is that at some point they will try to do exactly the same that Android is doing right now. But, well, let's see. Because right now, if we are talking about a scam and all these things from a malicious application perspective is right now not feasible with dealing with iOS. Something that Google has been dealing with since the very beginning. But right now, let's see how it tackles from Apple perspective. Let's see.
Yeah, that's a very good point because we have a representative from Google sitting here on the security team, but Apple takes a very different approach. They're very closed when it comes to doing security testing and adding security features to the platform to the point where if you want to actually do a detection of another application on the device, you need to basically have device admin privileges on the iOS device. So, as George mentioned, if there's no changes to that approach and not allowing, outside security tools or products to check the validity of applications that are sideloaded onto the device, well, there's not much industry can do outside of Apple.
If I could just quickly add, as Jorge said earlier, obviously Android does allow the ability to install from multiple sources. In fact, on a Samsung phone, there are two preloaded stores, right? There's the Play Store and the Galaxy Store. The concern, and I think this is where when regulators look at this, they have to think about this from a balance of a security and user experience perspective, is not all side loading is equal. And if you look at especially these scams as an example, they're not coming from digital marketplaces. They're literally coming through like a message that, a WhatsApp message where somebody downloads it from there, or they get a text to an ephemeral URL that gets rotated every couple minutes. Yep. They're web-based distributions. And so maybe, that's the thing is when the regulators say what type of side loading should be allowed, they should be thinking about that and make sure it's proportionate and balanced and not wide open or too restrictive. There needs to be some kind of middle.
Okay. George?
Yeah, just one final thought. In addition to this, it's important that from iOS perspective, we do some initial review before publishing, and they check some things. This is completely different from Android. From Android perspective, you don't trust an application. And this will be completely different because there are things that are not supposed to be done with iOS platform that now can be done because there is no previous check. So the attack surface will be bigger for an iOS device.
Indeed. Okay. Before we conclude, maybe I would like to invite each panelist to give final thoughts to the audience, something for them to take away. Starting with Casey.
Oh, I was hoping I'd go last, but thank you, Rodney. I think, again, my final thought would be this. And it's an extension to the last discussion that we had. I do think that as difficult as the situation is now, if you project this forward in terms of putting it on the exponential curve of where technology is going and the volume, you're certainly seeing this in Singapore, your reports indicate it. This problem is not going to get easier, and we're not going to solve it by putting more manual processes in or security professionals or all of these other areas that are discussed, although they are key concerns. I still believe that, again, from a vendor perspective, and we take this obligation very seriously, we have to make this experience something that the consumer, the enterprise user can do seamlessly. It has to be highly undisruptive to what they're doing. Again, our telemetry shows us that even with all of the privacy settings and abilities that have been implemented in mobile technologies, very few users are actually enacting that.
I make it akin to, you have your car and you have all these controls in your car, but vast majority of people just want to set the temperature and go. They don't want to take advantage of all the little settings that are there. So I think as an industry, we have to do a better job of employing the capabilities that are there collectively and from a regulatory perspective in a way that really takes into account that, again, vast majority of users are going to want to have those controls, but we're going to have to take, I think, some very audacious leaps to protect the general populace in a way, because I think as security professionals, we can foresee what's coming, and we live this every day, but from a general public perspective, we're really going to have to do a much better job in terms of making this as seamless as possible with the most advanced capabilities that are available both on the device, the application, and the operating system. So again, this is a great collective to have this discussion, but that's where I would leave my comments.
Thank you, Casey. Eugene?
Yeah, I mean, first, I really want to say thank you to the Cybersecurity Agency and MCI and others to invite us to participate on this panel, because I think it's really nice to get a broad perspective. I guess I agree with Casey that people will find other ways. I'll give a really good example real quick, which is, I know somebody, I was saying this earlier, somebody else, that super smart, tech-savvy person, and they were fooled in the US that they have to send gift cards because it was IRS related, right, our Internal Revenue Service. So these scammers are really good at psychologically rushing a person and telling them you must do this, and oftentimes these people will come back and say, what did I just do? I don't even know what I was thinking. I just was told what to do and do it. So I think, I know it's a broken record, but awareness training is really important. Something I think we're trying to do locally here in partnership with the government about, kind of pause, assess, and then do something. The other thing, like I said, I think as industry, we need to do this together, and there's something the OS provider can do, there's something the app developer can do. I think having a good bar, a standards-based approach so everybody knows what they have to do to be better at this, and continuing to have the dialogue between public and private sector to work together, because it sounds cliche, but we're better together.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, I'll tag on to that point. There's absolutely a need for everyone to work together, and the challenge coming from the top level perspective is you can only do so much when you're a global organization. And hitting on a point my fellow panelists made earlier, when we get to security, it gets down to an individual level. What am I comfortable with in terms of what the applications I'm accessing are doing? So, as a user in the US, there's a lot of sensitivity about data going to places like Russia and China. Well, at Google's level, they're global. If I'm an end user in the US, well, I'm definitely concerned. So how do you balance those things? And I think the only way is by providing those multiple levels of defense, having different solutions built for those different markets and the ability to judge those things. So at the end of the day, I'll say again, I think it's about empowering the end user to be aware of these issues, something that we're calling democratizing mobile security, and that's what we're working on today.
Okay, I guess from my side, it's just that I would like to invite everybody to go to mas.ovasp.org. If you're not aware yet of the project, then please feel free to use it. I think it's definitely helpful. I could hear over the last few years that it was helping, for example, on a company level to shape their mobile application security policy, from developers to have the proper input for their threat modeling, how they should check which kind of security controls are actually needed, and of course on the testing side, what you actually should do in order to test thoroughly and really according to a methodology the different kind of controls that we have in the MASVS.
Well, from my perspective, today we have been discussing about the different security layers from bottom. We are talking about secure element, trusted execution environments, firmware, security controls at application layer, operating system, and so on. But the final layer is the user. And awareness is the key. Just to provide some insights, we have one of the most recognized bank applications is from a Spanish bank. It has been selected as best application by Forrester, maybe the last 3 or 5 years. And finally, they reached a point where they invested, they hired some psychologists just to improve awareness and show red screens, green screens when dealing with operations just to show them warnings. So basically it means that in the end, responsibility is on the user and awareness is the key.
Okay, we have covered a lot of grounds today. A big thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights. We definitely benefit a lot. It's a very engaging discussion. So please join me for a round of applause for our panelists, please.
Thank you very much, Rodney. Along with our panelists, can I now all invite you to stand in the middle of the stage? Let's take a group photograph, please. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You may now return to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of Scams and Mobile Security. We hope that you enjoyed today's program. So thank you for being with us this afternoon, and do come back to join us here in Room A tomorrow morning for our next International IoT program. We'll see you tomorrow.